At dinner, my son casually asked, "Why aren't you in the house I built?" His words hit me like a punch. I paused, looked him in the eye, and replied, "Because I didn't ask you to build it for me." The room went silent. His face turned pale, realizing he had crossed a line. He didn't expect that. My name is Wesley. I am 69 years old, and before I tell you how I systematically dismantled my own son's entitled life piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe respect is earned, not demanded by greedy relatives. The evening started as a rare invitation to an upscale, dimly lit steakhouse in the heart of downtown Atlanta. Aaron, my 35-year-old son, and his wife Megan had insisted we needed a family dinner to discuss my future. I should have known better than to trust their sudden burst of hospitality. Between bites of an $80 filet mignon that I knew I would inevitably end up paying for, Megan leaned forward. She wore a designer dress she had probably charged to the company card, her blonde hair perfectly styled, framing a smile that always made my teeth grind. "Wesley." She began using that sickly sweet tone she reserved purely for manipulation. "We have such wonderful news for you today. The guest house in our backyard is finally finished. It is absolutely perfect for you. We picked out the paint colors just thinking of your comfort. A guest house. That is what she dared to call it. I had driven past their property a week prior and seen that atrocious structure with my own eyes. It was an unpermitted, glorified tool shed hastily slapped together with cheap drywall, mismatched shingles, and zero proper insulation. They honestly wanted me to leave my beautiful estate to live in a miserable shack behind their swimming pool. I took a slow sip of my bourbon, letting the silence stretch until Megan shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her fake smile faltering just a fraction. "Is that so?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm and steady. "And what makes you think I am in the market for a backyard shed, Megan?" Aaron immediately jumped in to defend his wife, puffing out his chest in a tailored suit that completely failed to hide his lack of backbone. "Come on, Dad," he said, using that patronizing tone that always made me want to grab him by the collar and shake some sense into him. "It is not a shed. It is an accessory dwelling unit. We spent $50,000 making it comfortable and accessible for you. Megan and I have been talking for weeks, and it is time we face reality together. You are pushing 70. Living alone in that massive $1.5 million house is just not practical anymore. It is actually dangerous. What if you fall down those grand stairs? What if you have a medical emergency and nobody is around to hear you? You do not need 5 bedrooms and 3 acres of land to maintain at your age. It is a burden." I watched my son, the boy I had raised to be a strong man, echoing the exact words of a greedy wife who had been trying to get her hands on my hard-earned assets since the day she married him. A burden I repeated, feeling the cold, hard anger settling deep into my bones. "You think my home is a burden to me?" Megan reached across the table and tried to touch my hand, a gesture of fake affection I immediately pulled away from. "We just want you close, Wesley," she cooed, tilting her head in mock sympathy. "We want to take care of you in your golden years. Think of how easy it will be for you. No maintenance, no property taxes, just relaxing. Plus, selling your estate now while the Atlanta housing market is so hot would give you incredible liquidity. We could even help you manage the funds, so you do not have to stress over complicated financial decisions." There it was, the naked, ugly truth laid bare on the white linen tablecloth. They did not care about my knees or the stairs or my golden years. They wanted me to liquidate the single most valuable asset I owned, hand them the cash to manage, and quietly disappear into a cheap plywood box in their backyard so I would not be an inconvenience. I looked at Aaron, searching his eyes for any trace of shame, any ounce of the integrity I had tried to instill in him for 3 decades. I saw absolutely nothing, just a weak, foolish man blinded by a woman's ambition and his own profound laziness. "I have managed my own finances since before you were a thought in this world, Aaron," I said, keeping my voice low so the surrounding tables could not hear the storm brewing. "I built a multi-million-dollar construction empire from nothing, and you sit here drinking expensive wine on my dime trying to convince me I am too old to balance a checkbook." Aaron flushed, his fragile ego visibly bruised. "Dad, do not make this difficult," he snapped back. "We are trying to do the responsible thing here. You cannot stay in that house forever. It is too much space for one old man. Too much space for one old man." Those words cut me incredibly deep, not because they were true, but because they completely dismissed everything that house represented. Aaron had no idea what it took to build that home. When I was his age, I was working grueling 14-hour shifts in the blazing Georgia sun, laying bricks, pouring concrete, and fighting for every single commercial contract just to put food on the table. My late wife, Corinne, God rest her beautiful soul, worked right alongside me every step of the way. She managed the accounting books late at night while I drafted blueprints at the sticky kitchen table of our cramped two-bedroom apartment. That $1.5 million house was not just a piece of real estate to me, it was our ultimate masterpiece. I poured the foundation with my own calloused hands. Corinne picked out every piece of rich mahogany trim, every slab of imported marble, every light fixture. It was the sanctuary we dreamed of back when we had absolutely nothing to our names. Corinne died 5 years ago, and every single corner of that estate still holds her memory, her laughter, her spirit. And now Aaron, a boy who had been handed the keys to my thriving construction firm on a silver platter, who had never swung a hammer or sweat through a work shirt in his entire privileged life, was telling me to abandon her memory. He had taken the successful company I built and turned it into his personal piggy bank to fund Megan's ridiculous country club lifestyle. He spent his days playing golf and playing boss, completely detached from the hard labor that funded his very existence. Looking at his soft, unblemished hands and his expensive gold watch, my contempt for him almost choked me. He was perfectly content to try and strip his grieving father of his dignity, his history, and his home just to fund his wife's next shopping spree and cover up his own massive inadequacies as a man. The waiter arrived just in time to break the thick, suffocating tension, placing the black leather check presenter softly in the center of the table. Predictably, Aaron made absolutely no move to reach for it. He just stared at me, waiting for me to pull out my wallet like I always did, waiting for me to be the good, compliant father who financed his delusions of grandeur. At dinner, my son casually asked, "Why aren't you packing your things for the house I built?" His words hit me like a punch. I paused, looked him dead in the eye, and replied, "Because I didn't ask you to build it for me." I stood up, slowly, took a crisp $100 bill from my pocket, threw it onto the table to cover my own meal, and left the remaining $300 balance sitting right in front of him. Aaron's jaw dropped open. The room went completely silent as his face turned pale, realizing he had crossed a line and that I was walking away. I left them sitting there with a massive bill they couldn't pay, walking out into the cool Atlanta night, ready to burn their entitled world to the ground. The morning sun was already baking the Atlanta pavement when I pulled my heavy-duty pickup truck onto the quiet, tree-lined street of my son's affluent suburban neighborhood. I knew their schedule better than they realized. Aaron would be at his exclusive country club pretending to network with potential clients, and Megan would be at her overpriced Pilates class before heading to brunch. The coast was entirely clear. I parked a block away and walked the rest of the distance, not wanting to alert their nosy neighbors. I bypassed their massive front doors and walked straight through the side gate leading into the backyard. I did not come to visit. I came to inspect. They had the audacity to sit across from me at a high-end restaurant and boldly claim they spent $50,000 building me a luxurious guest house. A custom sanctuary, Megan had called it. I wanted to see exactly what $50,000 bought under my son's so-called leadership. I stepped onto the perfectly manicured lawn and locked my eyes on the structure sitting at the edge of the property line. From 50 feet away, it looked like a modern, minimalist cottage. But I have been in the construction business for 40 years. My eyes do not see paint and aesthetic trim. My eyes see foundations, load-bearing walls, and structural integrity. And as I walked closer, the illusion of luxury completely vanished, replaced by the glaring reality of incompetence and sheer disrespect. I stood in front of the unit and let my professional instincts take over. The sheer level of amateur craftsmanship made my blood boil. The foundation was the first glaring red flag. Instead of a properly poured and leveled concrete slab, they had used cheap, precast concrete piers that were already shifting in the soft Georgia clay. A heavy rainstorm would wash the dirt right out from under it, causing the entire structure to sink and crack within a year. I walked up to the exterior wall and ran my hand along the siding. They had used the thinnest, cheapest composite material available on the market, the kind you use for a temporary storage shed, not a human dwelling. I pulled out my master set of keys, picked the flimsy lock on the front door with embarrassing ease, and stepped inside. The stale, suffocating heat hit me instantly. There was absolutely no proper ventilation or insulation in the walls. They expected a 69-year-old man to live in a poorly insulated box that would roast like an oven in August and freeze solid in January. I tapped my knuckles against the drywall. It sounded hollow, improperly secured to the studs. I could see the seam lines where the tape and mud had been rushed by an unskilled hand. I walked over to the small kitchenette area and crouched down to inspect the plumbing beneath the sink. The pipes were a chaotic mess of mismatched PVC and cheap fittings practically begging to burst and flood the entire floor. But the most terrifying discovery was the electrical panel. I opened the small metal door and immediately recognized the haphazard spaghetti-like wiring. It was a complete violation of city safety codes. They had skipped hiring a licensed union electrician to save a few bucks, opting for some cut-rate handyman who clearly did not know how to ground a circuit properly. One power surge, one overloaded outlet, and this entire wooden trap would go up in flames in a matter of minutes. This was the $50,000 gift they wanted to graciously bestow upon me. They had cut every conceivable corner using the most substandard materials they could find and threw it together with sloppy, unskilled labor. It was an absolute death trap. A cheap, unpermitted hazard designed to house an old man they no longer wanted to deal with. The absolute disrespect burned hot in my chest. I had spent my entire life building a reputation for excellence. When Corinne and I started out, we made a pact to never compromise on quality, even when we were dead broke. My company was known across the state for structural integrity and honest, unbreakable work. Aaron had taken that proud legacy and bastardized it to build a disposable backyard shack. I stepped back outside, my jaw clenched so tight, my teeth physically ached, determined to find out exactly who signed off on this monumental disaster. I walked around to the back of the structure where the construction debris had been carelessly piled up against a chain-link fence. A messy job site is the absolute hallmark of a lazy contractor. There were empty buckets of cheap joint compound, warped offcuts of untreated pine and shattered ceramic tiles just left to rot in the weeds. I kicked a stack of discarded drywall in frustration, sending a cloud of white dust into the humid air. As the dust settled, something caught my eye. Pinned beneath a heavy broken cinder block was a crumpled, rain-stained piece of heavy stock paper. I crouched down, pulled the paper free, and brushed off the red clay dirt. It was a formal legal document printed on official letterhead. I unfolded it, and my eyes scanned the bold black text at the top of the page. It was a mechanic's lien, a formal notice of intent to foreclose. My heart began to pound with a slow, heavy rhythm as I read the details. The lien was filed by a reputable local plumbing subcontractor, a man I had actually done business with a decade ago. The document clearly stated that his crew had completed the water and sewer lines for this backyard unit 3 months ago and had not been paid a single dime. The outstanding balance was for $15,000. I stood there staring at the number. Aaron had boldly looked me in the eye at that fancy steakhouse and claimed he and Megan spent $50,000 of their own money to build this place. Yet here was undeniable proof that the hard-working blue-collar men who actually broke their backs digging the trenches were being stiffed. Where did that $50,000 actually go? I kept reading the legal notice, moving down to the billing address and the listed contractor responsible for the debt, and that is when the bottom completely dropped out of my world. The contractor listed on the legal notice of default was not Aaron. It did not have his personal name, nor did it list his home address. The name printed in bold accusatory letters was the exact name of the commercial construction corporation I had founded with my own 2 hands. Aaron was using my corporate accounts, my commercial building license, and my pristine business credit to illegally construct his personal backyard shed. He was hiding his private residential project under the umbrella of my commercial enterprise, and worse, he was completely ignoring the invoices, destroying the company's credit rating, and robbing honest laborers of their livelihoods. He was running a fraudulent scheme right under my nose to fund his wife's vanity project. The cold, calculated rage that washed over me completely suffocated any lingering fatherly affection I had left for the boy. I carefully folded the rain-stained lien, slid it deep into the breast pocket of my jacket, and walked back to my truck. I did not need to confront him at his country club. I needed to go straight to the source. It was time to pay a surprise visit to my own corporate headquarters. The drive to downtown Atlanta took less than 30 minutes, but my knuckles were white against the steering wheel the entire way. I parked my heavy-duty truck right in the reserved spot marked Chief Executive Officer. Aaron's spot. He was not there, of course. I pushed through the heavy glass double doors of the corporate headquarters I had built from a single rented desk into a regional powerhouse. The moment my boots hit the polished marble floor of the lobby, the atmosphere shifted. The low hum of ringing phones and office chatter instantly died. The receptionist, a young woman who had only seen me in the framed legacy photographs on the wall, froze mid-sentence. The senior project managers walking down the hallway stopped dead in their tracks, lowering their clipboards. I had not stepped foot in this building for nearly 2 years. They knew me as the founding father, the ghost who signed their original paychecks, and the dark, uncompromising look on my face told them I was not here for a friendly social visit. I did not greet anyone. I walked with a heavy, deliberate pace straight past the luxurious executive suites and pushed open the frosted glass door of the accounting department. The room was freezing, the air conditioning blasting from the ceiling vents, but the chief accountant, a man named Thomas, who had worked for me for 15 years, immediately broke into a visible sweat the second he saw me standing in his doorway. Thomas stood up so fast his ergonomic chair slammed into the wall behind him. "Wesley," he stammered, adjusting his glasses with a trembling hand. "We did not know you were coming in today. Aaron did not mention a meeting. Aaron does not know I am here," I replied, my voice dangerously flat and devoid of any warmth. "And you are going to sit back down, open the master ledger, and give me full administrative access to every single corporate account right now." Thomas hesitated, his eyes darting nervously toward the hallway. Wesley Aaron gave strict instructions that all financial audits had to go through him first. I stepped closer to his desk, leaning my weight onto my palms, invading his space. "Thomas, I pay the lease on this building. I own the desks, the computers, and the server you are trying to hide behind. Open the books or pack your personal belongings." Thomas swallowed hard, sat down, and turned his monitor toward me. He typed in his credentials, his fingers shaking so badly he had to re-enter his secure password twice. When the general ledger populated on the bright screen, I ordered him to filter the expenses by the last 24 months. I wanted to see every outbound wire, every credit card statement, and every vendor payment. What I saw made my stomach turn with absolute disgust. Aaron and his wife were not just building a backyard shed on the company dime, they were completely gutting my life's work. I ran my finger down the screen, scrutinizing line after line of blatant fraudulent accounting. There was a charge for $12,000 categorized under site consultation fees. I opened the attached receipt to find a week-long stay at a luxury ski resort in Aspen, Colorado. I scrolled down to a recurring monthly charge of $2,000 labeled as material transport leases. It was the lease payment for Megan's brand new luxury SUV. I found expensive spa treatments, written off as team-building exercises, designer retail clothing purchases, hidden under office supplies, and massive fine dining bills coded as client entertainment. For 2 straight years, they had been treating my commercial construction firm like an endless personal black card. I demanded Thomas pull up the specific invoices for Aaron's residential address. Thomas clicked a few folders, looking physically sick. He pulled up a file labeled Project Alpha. It was a dummy account. Under Project Alpha, I found the plumbing lien I had discovered earlier in the dirt, along with massive unpaid invoices for drywall, roofing, and electrical work. Aaron was not just stealing cash. He was actively defrauding the working-class vendors who had trusted the corporate name I spent decades building. I looked at Thomas, who was staring at his keyboard, too ashamed to meet my eyes. "You let this happen," I stated calmly. He flinched under my gaze. "He threatened to fire me, Wesley. He said he was the boss now." I just nodded, absorbing the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. He said he was the boss now. That was the grand, pathetic illusion Aaron had been living under. 2 years ago, when my beautiful Corinne lost her battle with illness, the grief was a suffocating weight. I could barely look at the commercial blueprints we used to draw together without feeling a physical ache in my chest. I needed time to mourn, time to find my footing in a world that no longer had my wife in it. Aaron had just finished his business degree, walking around with a fancy piece of paper that he thought made him a born leader. I stepped back from the day-to-day operations to give him room to grow. I gave him the title of Chief Executive Officer. I let him take the massive corner office with the floor-to-ceiling windows. I gave him the prestige, the 6-figure salary, and the public recognition. I wanted him to feel the heavy weight of leadership, hoping the responsibility would turn him into the honorable man Corinne always prayed he would become. But I am not a fool, and I have never been naive about the brutal reality of business. I did not build a multi-million-dollar empire by acting on blind faith. When I handed him the keys to the office, I never surrendered my majority shares. I structured the corporate bylaws with my legal team so that I retained absolute and total financial veto power. I remained the supreme authority over the board of directors and the primary signatory on every single corporate bank account. Aaron was nothing more than a highly paid manager playing dress-up in his father's oversized shoes. He mistook my grief-induced distance for a permanent retirement. He genuinely believed that because I was out of sight, I had relinquished my power. He thought I was just a tired old man who would never bother to look under the hood of the car he was driving straight into the ground. I did not scream at the accountant. I did not throw a tantrum, and I certainly did not call Aaron to demand a tearful explanation. Explanations were for simple misunderstandings, and this was an orchestrated, malicious robbery. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my cell phone right there in the freezing accounting office. I dialed the direct private line of my commercial banker, a senior executive who managed the corporate accounts and answered only to me. When he picked up, I did not exchange pleasantries or ask about his day. I verified my identity with my secure authorization codes and gave a very clear, very simple directive. I want an immediate and total freeze placed on all corporate credit lines, commercial checking accounts, and company-issued credit cards. Decline every single pending transaction. Revoke all authorized user privileges for Aaron and his wife effective this exact second. The banker confirmed the financial lockdown was actively in place before I ended the call. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, looking down at the silent, terrified accountant sitting at his desk. The trap was officially set. The lifeblood of Aaron and Megan's lavish, entitled lifestyle was severed with a single, quiet phone call. I turned my back on Thomas and walked out of the building, ready to watch their stolen house of cards completely collapse. I had barely pulled my heavy-duty truck into the driveway of my estate when my cell phone started vibrating in the cup holder. The caller ID flashed Aaron's name in bright white letters. I let it ring 4 times before slowly swiping the screen to answer, keeping my breathing completely even. "Dad." Aaron shouted, his voice cracking with a high-pitched panic that I had not heard since he was a teenager caught sneaking out of the house. "Did you call the commercial bank? I am getting fraud alerts on my phone." I sat in the driver's seat staring out at the expansive lawn Corinne and I had planted together and let a calculated silence hang in the air. Aaron did not even wait for an answer before rambling on. "Megan is at Phipps Plaza right now. She is at the designer boutique trying to check out, and her corporate card just declined in front of everyone. The manager even came over. She is totally humiliated, Dad. The bank told her the account is frozen by the primary signatory. What is going on?" I smiled, a cold and hard pull of my facial muscles. I could perfectly picture Megan standing at a polished glass counter, clutching a $1,000 handbag, turning crimson as the cashier handed back her useless plastic card. The sheer embarrassment of a declined card in an upscale Atlanta boutique was exactly the kind of public humiliation her shallow ego could not handle. I kept my tone perfectly level, laced with just the right amount of grave concern. "Yes, Aaron, I ordered the freeze," I said, leaning back against the leather seat of my truck. "I did not want to alarm you, but we have a massive crisis on our hands." The panic in his voice shifted immediately to sheer terror. "A crisis," he parroted, his breath hitching. "What kind of crisis?" I took a deep breath, playing the role of the diligent and protective founder. "I received a highly concerning tip this morning," I lied smoothly, letting the weight of my words crush him. "I went down to the accounting department to review the general ledger, and Aaron, my boy, I am furious. Someone inside our company is bleeding us dry. There are hundreds of thousands of dollars missing." Aaron choked on his own breath. "What do you mean missing?" "Dad, there must be a mistake. The software sometimes glitches." "There is no software glitch that books a luxury ski vacation in Aspen under site consultation fees." "Aaron," I replied, my voice sharp as a razor. "There is no computer error that pays a $2,000 monthly lease for a luxury SUV using the material transport budget. Someone has compromised our commercial accounts and is routing company cash to fund their own lavish lifestyle. I even found a mechanic's lien filed against our corporate name for a residential plumbing job. This is a highly coordinated and malicious embezzlement scheme, and it is happening right under your nose." I could hear his rapid and shallow breathing over the receiver. He was absolutely paralyzed. He knew I was listing his exact purchases, but my framing completely trapped him. If he admitted those were his expenses, he was confessing to corporate fraud and tax evasion. If he played dumb, he had to agree with my lockdown. "I am bringing in an external team of forensic auditors, first thing Monday morning." I continued, relentlessly ignoring his sputtering attempts to interrupt. I have instructed the bank to lock down every single line of credit until we root out this criminal. We are going to track down every missing dime. I will not let some thief destroy the legacy your mother and I built." I heard a loud thud in the background like he had dropped a file folder or bumped into his desk in his panic. "Dad, you are overreacting," he pleaded. "I am telling you I authorize some alternative accounting methods for tax purposes. It is completely legal." I cut him off. "Alternative accounting does not buy designer handbags at Phipps Plaza. You need to gather all your security access logs, Aaron. Whoever is doing this might be looking at serious federal prison time for wire fraud." "Dad, please wait," Aaron stammered, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "Do not call any auditors yet. I can handle this. I am the CEO. I will look into the discrepancies myself. We do not need to involve outsiders. We need to keep this quiet to protect the company reputation. Let me call the bank and lift the freeze so Megan can get home, and I will fix the ledger tonight. You cannot fix a federal crime with a spreadsheet. Aaron," I said coldly, "the freeze stays. No one spends a single penny of company money until the audit is completely finished." Suddenly, the muffled sound of Aaron's office door opening echoed through the phone, followed immediately by Megan's shrill and unmistakable voice. She must have driven straight to corporate headquarters the second she fled the boutique. "Aaron, you need to fix this right now," she shrieked, clearly not caring who heard her. "I had to leave a cart full of merchandise on the counter. Do you know how embarrassing that was?" The cashier looked at me like I was a beggar. "Call the bank and threaten to pull our accounts." Aaron hushed her frantically, but the phone was clearly on speaker now. "Megan, stop yelling," he hissed. "My dad is on the line. He froze the accounts. He says there is an audit." "An audit?" Megan scoffed, her voice dripping with venom. "What is he talking about? Tell him to unfreeze my card. I need to pay the caterer for the guest house party next week. You cannot just cut us off." "It is not that simple," Aaron yelled back, completely losing control of the situation. "He knows about the Aspen trip. He knows about the car lease and the plumbing lien. I told you we were pulling too much cash this quarter. I told you to slow down your shopping, but you never listen." "Excuse me," Megan fired back, her tone turning vicious. "Do not try to pin this on me. You are the one who told me the company was ours to use. You are the one who signed off on the backyard build because you wanted a man cave before we decided to shove your father in it. You are the CEO, Aaron. Act like a man and handle your old man." They were turning on each other like cornered rats. The illusion of their perfect and unified marriage shattered the second the money ran dry. I sat quietly in my truck, listening to them tear each other apart, feeling a profound sense of vindication. Before Aaron could respond to his wife's insult, I heard a sharp rustle and the phone was snatched away. "Wesley," Megan said, dropping the frantic tone and replacing it with a low and menacing sweetness. "I think you are getting incredibly confused in your old age. There is no fraud. You are imagining things that are not there. This kind of extreme paranoia is exactly why we built that guest house for you. You are clearly not mentally fit to manage these high-stress corporate accounts anymore." I gripped the steering wheel, my jaw locking. "You think I am paranoid, Megan?" "No, Wesley, I think you are declining," she replied smoothly, twisting the knife. "And if you do not call the bank and remove this ridiculous freeze right now, Aaron and I are going to have to make some very difficult medical decisions regarding your competency. For your own safety, of course. We will have a doctor intervene if you force our hand. Do not make us do that." She hung up the phone, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The line was drawn. The morning after Megan made her thinly veiled threat to have me declared mentally unfit, I woke up before dawn. I brewed a pot of strong black coffee, stood by the massive bay windows of my living room, and watched the sun slowly rise over the estate I had built with Corinne. The peace of the early morning was abruptly shattered at exactly 8 o'clock. A sleek silver Mercedes glided up my long driveway, crunching softly against the gravel, and parked right next to my rose bushes. A man stepped out. He was a sharply dressed white man in his late 30s, wearing a tailored navy suit that screamed obnoxious corporate ambition. He strutted to the trunk of his car, pulled out a heavy wooden post, and grabbed a mallet. With an arrogant swing, he began driving the stake directly into my perfectly manicured front lawn. He attached a glossy metal bracket, and a large sign swung freely in the morning breeze. It read, "Elite Estate Properties," and across the top in bold red letters, "Coming soon." I did not blink. I did not drop my coffee mug. I simply watched the sheer audacity of the moment unfold. Megan and Aaron had wasted absolutely zero time. If they could not drain the company bank accounts, they were going to forcefully liquidate the roof over my head. I placed my mug on the kitchen counter, adjusted the cuffs of my crisp button-down shirt, and walked calmly out the heavy oak front door to greet my uninvited guest. The crisp morning air hit my face as I stepped off the porch and walked purposefully down the stone pathway. The man was admiring his handiwork, dusting dirt off his expensive leather shoes. "Good morning," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the lawn, devoid of any anger. "I assume you have a very good reason for hammering a piece of wood into my property." The man turned, flashing a practiced, blindingly white smile that did not reach his eyes. He quickly closed the distance between us, extending a manicured hand. "Good morning to you, sir. You must be Mr. Wesley. I am Bradley Vance, senior partner at Elite Estate Properties. Your son Aaron warned me you might be a little confused about the timeline today, but rest assured everything is being handled with the utmost professional care. We are aiming to get this property listed on the premium market by Friday." "Confused?" I repeated the word slowly, tasting the condescension dripping from his tone. "I assure you, Bradley, my cognitive faculties are operating at maximum capacity. This is my home. It is absolutely not for sale, and you are trespassing." Bradley let out a patronizing chuckle, the kind you reserve for a stubborn toddler. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. "Now, Wesley, let us not make this difficult. I know change is incredibly hard at your age, especially when health issues arise. But Aaron and your lovely daughter-in-law, Megan, have been completely transparent with me about your declining situation. They are making the hard choices for your own good." He opened the folder with a dramatic flourish and pulled out a stack of legally bound papers holding an embossed seal. "I am operating under a fully executed and notarized power of attorney, Bradley," stated, tapping his manicured index finger against the top page. "Your son has been granted comprehensive legal and financial authority over your estate. He signed the exclusive listing agreement with my brokerage late last night. We are officially putting this house on the market for $1.8 million. Aaron instructed me to fast-track the showings so we can secure the funds necessary to transition you into your new supportive living arrangement." He held the document out, waving it slightly as if to emphasize his absolute authority over my life. They had actually done it. They had escalated from corporate embezzlement to attempting to forcefully strip me of my primary residence. Aaron was trying to sell the home out from under me, cash the massive check, and kick me to the curb with a fraudulent legal document. I reached out with a steady hand and took the paperwork from Bradley. "Let me see that," I said quietly. Bradley smirked, handing it over willingly. "Of course, take your time reading it, Wesley. The legal jargon can be a bit dense, but my team ensured it is ironclad." I scanned the first page, absorbing the incredible arrogance of the maneuver. Aaron had clearly fed this broker a fabricated sob story about my mental health to ensure Bradley would ignore any protests I made. I held the crisp legal document in my hands and scrutinized the text. It was a general durable power of attorney granting Aaron total unrestricted control over my real estate assets, bank accounts, and medical directives. It was a terrifyingly comprehensive document designed to strip away every single civil right I possessed. I flipped directly to the final page to look at the execution block. The notary seal was present, stamped clearly in the bottom corner. But what my eyes locked onto was the signature line directly above it. There, written in black ink, was my full legal name. I stared at the looping cursive. It was a decent attempt capturing the general slant of my handwriting, but I had signed thousands of commercial contracts in my lifetime. I knew the exact pressure of my pen, the sharp angle of my W, and the specific tail of my Y. The signature on this legally binding document was a complete and undeniable forgery. For a fleeting moment, a sharp, suffocating wave of grief struck my chest. This was not just a greedy misstep. My own flesh and blood, the son I had cradled as an infant, had consciously crossed the line into committing a severe federal felony. He had sat down, gripped a pen, and maliciously forged his own father's name to steal his home. The profound heartbreak of realizing my son was entirely dead to morality washed over me. Corinne would have wept. But Corinne was gone, and I was the only one left to deal with the monster we had raised. I took a slow, steady breath, forcing the pain deep down into a locked vault inside my mind. The grieving father vanished in an instant, leaving only the cold, calculating businessman behind. I looked up from the forged document and met Bradley's smug, expectant gaze. I did not scream. I did not tear the fraudulent paperwork to pieces or violently rip his sign out of my lawn. I handed the document back to him with a polite, almost welcoming smile. "You know, Bradley, you are absolutely right. I said, my tone completely shifting to a warm and compliant register. These legal documents are quite dense, and my memory is not what it used to be. Why do we not head inside? I can brew us a fresh pitcher of iced tea, and you can walk me through exactly what Aaron has planned for the sale of my estate. Bradley beamed, clearly thrilled that the confused old man had decided to be cooperative. That sounds like a wonderful idea, Wesley, he replied eagerly, following me up the steps. As I turned my back to open the heavy front door, I slipped my right hand smoothly into my trouser pocket. My thumb found the side button on my smartphone, and with a quick double press, I silently activated the voice recording application. I was going to let this arrogant broker sit in my living room and confess every single detail of my son's criminal conspiracy on tape. I let Bradley drink a tall glass of iced tea, encouraged him to spill every single detail of Aaron's desperate instructions, and politely asked him to leave a copy of the fraudulent paperwork for my personal records before sending him on his way. I maintained a pleasant, confused facade right up until his silver Mercedes disappeared down the street. Less than an hour later, I was walking through the heavy glass doors of Vargas & Associates. I bypassed the front desk receptionist, who simply nodded at me with familiar respect, and walked straight into the corner office of Jonathan Vargas. Jonathan was in the middle of a phone call, but the second he saw the dark expression on my face, he held up a finger, abruptly ended his conversation, and stood up. I did not exchange pleasantries or offer a handshake. I pulled my smartphone from my jacket pocket, tapped the screen to pull up the audio file I had just recorded, and placed it squarely in the center of his massive mahogany desk. Right next to the phone, I laid the photocopied power of attorney that Bradley had so graciously provided. Jonathan looked down at the documents, then back up at me, his sharp dark eyes instantly recognizing the gravity in my posture. "Play the audio, Jonathan," I said, my voice carrying a quiet and dangerous weight. "And while you listen, read the signature on the last page of that physical document." I sat down in the leather guest chair across from his desk and watched closely as my fiercely loyal attorney listened to an arrogant real estate broker confess to a federal crime orchestrated by my own flesh and blood. Jonathan leaned over his desk, his expression turning to absolute stone as Bradley's voice echoed from the phone speaker, detailing Aaron and Megan's urgent demands to quickly liquidate my estate and force me into a care facility. When the recording finished, Jonathan picked up the power of attorney. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto the signature block at the bottom of the final page. "Wesley," he said, his voice deadly serious, "this is a blatant forgery. They did not even try to replicate the baseline pressure or the angle of your handwriting. This is a severe felony." "I know it is a felony, Jonathan," I replied coldly, lacing my fingers together. "What I need to know right now is exactly how far this cancer has spread. Aaron believes he has full control of my assets. A man foolish enough to forge his father's name on a residential real estate listing has absolutely used this fake document elsewhere to get his hands on fast cash. Find out what else he has touched today." Jonathan immediately spun his heavy leather chair toward his dual monitor setup. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he logged into the secure county property records and commercial title databases. The room was perfectly silent save for the rapid and aggressive clicking of his keys. I watched his jaw tighten. For several long minutes, he cross-referenced the corporate entities tracking every single recent transaction filed under my personal name and the company's commercial umbrella. Suddenly, Jonathan stopped typing. He let out a slow, heavy breath and turned the right monitor so I could clearly see the screen. "Wesley, it is much worse than a residential real estate listing," he said, pointing to a freshly filed digital document. "Aaron did not just use this fake power of attorney to hire a broker for your house. 3 weeks ago, he walked into a private commercial lending firm. He used this exact forged document to leverage a secondary mortgage against the industrial warehouse on the south side, the one you own completely outright." I stared at the digital property lien displayed on the glowing screen. The numbers glared back at me in stark black and white, confirming my absolute worst fears about my son's destructive greed. "How much did he take out?" I asked, though I could already see the staggering figures printed on the digital deed. $300,000. Jonathan confirmed, his tone laced with absolute disgust. "He took out a $300,000 high-interest commercial loan against your company warehouse, and the funds were immediately routed to a private joint checking account he shares exclusively with Megan. They are bleeding your hard assets for raw cash to fund their lifestyle. This is no longer just a bitter family dispute over a guest house, Wesley. This is massive financial fraud. He has effectively stolen $250,000 using a fabricated legal instrument. The sheer scale of Aaron's stupidity was staggering to comprehend. He had crossed from petty corporate embezzlement into a full-blown federal banking crime. He had mortgaged a commercial property he did not own using a fake signature to fund his wife's unquenchable thirst for luxury. He was a dead man walking, and he did not even realize it yet. I looked at Jonathan, watching the genuine and unyielding fury burn in his eyes. He was not just acting as my retained legal counsel in this moment. His anger was deeply personal. 30 years ago, before the custom-tailored suits and the high-rise corner office, Jonathan was just a smart, ambitious African-American teenager from a struggling family. His father, Mateo, was one of the hardest-working foremen on my very first construction crew. When Mateo suffered a devastating fall on a job site that left him permanently paralyzed, the insurance companies tried to deny his claim and leave his family with absolutely nothing. I refused to let that happen. I paid for Mateo's medical bills out of my own pocket, kept his family fed, and personally funded Jonathan's entire college and law school education. I saw a brilliant spark in the boy, and I knew Corinne and I had the resources to change his trajectory. I never asked for a single dime back. Jonathan graduated at the top of his class and built a formidable reputation as a brilliant financial crimes attorney, but he never once forgot who laid the foundation for his success. To Jonathan, I was not just a wealthy client paying a retainer fee. I was family. He viewed my corporate empire with the same protective reverence that I did. Seeing Aaron, a boy who had been handed the world on a silver platter, maliciously dismantle the legacy that fed both our families was an insult Jonathan could not stomach. He looked at me with a fierce, unwavering loyalty that Aaron had completely failed to inherit. He was ready to go to war for me. Jonathan reached across his desk and grabbed his heavy office phone. "I am calling the Federal Bureau of Investigation right now, Wesley," he stated with absolute, unwavering certainty. "We hand over this audio recording, the forged power of attorney, and the fraudulent commercial loan records today. The FBI will have Aaron and Megan in federal holding before dinner time. They are looking at decades in federal prison for wire fraud and identity theft." I reached out and firmly pressed my hand down on the telephone receiver, disconnecting the line before he could dial a single digit. "No," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Arresting them now is far too easy. It is too fast. If they go to jail today, they will just play the victims. They will claim they were desperate and try to manipulate a jury." Jonathan looked at me confused but highly attentive. "What do you want to do, Wesley?" "I want you to buy that high-interest commercial loan Aaron just took out," I instructed, my eyes locked dead on his. "Create an anonymous shell corporation today, purchase the debt from that private lender, and make me the supreme holder of that $300,000 note. I do not want a cheap arrest, Jonathan. I want the most ruthless foreclosure you have ever executed." I left Jonathan's office with a clear, devastating roadmap for my son's financial ruin. But before I dropped the guillotine on their fraudulent empire, I needed to give them exactly what they were looking for. I needed to feed their delusion. I drove back to my estate, poured myself a glass of water, and picked up my phone. I dialed Aaron's number, making sure my voice trembled just enough to sound fragile and disoriented. "Aaron, I need you to come over right now," I stammered, letting a note of panic slip into my words. "I cannot find the original blueprints for the downtown high-rise. I know your mother put them in the study, but everything is disorganized." The line went dead silent for a fraction of a second before Aaron replied, clearly caught off guard by my sudden shift from the ruthless executive he spoke to yesterday. "Dad, you finished that building 10 years ago. Why are you looking for the blueprints?" "Just come over," I pleaded, hanging up before he could ask any more questions. Less than 20 minutes later, Aaron's car pulled into the driveway. He and Megan walked through the front door, their faces a mix of apprehension and eager curiosity. I was standing in the center of the living room, surrounded by a pile of old photo albums and random paperwork I had purposefully scattered across the Persian rug. I looked up, letting my eyes glaze over slightly. "Corinne," I said, looking directly at Megan with a soft, confused smile. "I am so glad you are home. I cannot find the papers." Megan froze in the entryway, her manicured hand hovering over her designer purse. For a brief, unguarded moment, pure shock registered on her face. But it vanished instantly, replaced by a predatory gleam that illuminated her features like a neon sign. I had just called my 32-year-old white daughter-in-law by the name of my late beautiful African-American wife. To a court of law, to a judge reviewing a petition for medical guardianship, this was the holy grail of cognitive decline. Megan practically vibrated with excitement. She glanced at Aaron, her eyes wide, communicating a silent, victorious message. He is finally cracking. Megan stepped forward, her voice dripping with that familiar, sickeningly sweet condescension she used to mask her boundless greed. "Oh, Wesley," she cooed, deliberately avoiding correcting me. "It is me. We are here to help you look for the papers. Why do you not sit down in your armchair? You look so exhausted. The stress of the day is just too much for you, is it not?" I allowed myself to look deeply vulnerable, shuffling toward the heavy leather armchair with a slow, exaggerated gait. I rubbed my temples, murmuring incoherently about needing to finish the foundation pours before the winter freeze, referencing a commercial project from 2 decades ago. As I lowered myself into the chair, I kept my peripheral vision razor sharp. I watched Megan smoothly slide her oversized smartphone out of her handbag. She did not hold it up to her ear or place it face down on the coffee table. Instead, she leaned against the edge of the fireplace mantel, gripping the device at waist height. Her thumb subtly tapped the screen, and the faint red recording indicator lit up, reflecting slightly off her glossy manicured nail. She was actively filming me. She was gathering fabricated medical evidence in my own living room to present to a judge. Megan prompted me again, guiding the narrative to ensure her video captured maximum instability. "Wesley, do you remember what year it is?" she asked gently, stepping just enough into the frame to look like a deeply concerned caretaker. "Are you feeling confused about the bank accounts again? Is that why you locked our cards yesterday? You were just having a bad episode, right?" She was incredibly calculating. She was using this staged performance to build a legal defense for her declined credit cards, framing my strategic financial lockdown as the erratic, paranoid actions of a man losing his grip on reality. I played right into her hands, staring blankly at the wall and shaking my head. "The bank," I muttered, letting my voice trail off into a heavy sigh. "I do not know. Everything is moving too fast. Corinne usually handles the checks." Megan bit her lip to hide her massive, triumphant smile. She was capturing every single second of my fake delusion, convinced she had just secured the key to my entire fortune. Aaron remained standing near the doorway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked incredibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from side to side as he watched his wife exploit my fabricated mental collapse. For a fleeting second, I saw a shadow of genuine guilt cross his face. He was looking at the man who had taught him how to ride a bike, who had bailed him out of every scrape, and who had handed him the keys to an empire. Seeing me reduced to a babbling, confused old man should have broken his heart. It should have driven him to his knees in tears, begging to help me. But Aaron is a weak man, and weak men always let their greed overpower their conscience. Instead of stopping Megan from filming, he walked over and knelt beside my chair, placing a heavy hand on my knee. "Dad, it is going to be okay," he said, his voice thick with a forced, theatrical sympathy that made my stomach churn. "You have been working too hard for too long. Megan and I have been telling you that you need to let go. You need to let us take the wheel. You are not well, Dad. You are mixing up names and years. It is dangerous for you to be managing the corporate funds or living alone in this massive house. We are going to get you the professional help you need, and we are going to make sure your assets are protected." He was rationalizing his own criminal behavior right to my face. He was using my fake vulnerability to absolve himself of the forgery, the theft, and the embezzlement. He genuinely convinced himself that stealing my estate was an act of mercy. He nodded at Megan, silently confirming that they were entirely on the same page. Megan kept the phone perfectly angled, capturing Aaron playing the role of the devoted son while I sat slumped in my chair, the picture of tragic senility. They thought they had outsmarted a master chess player by moving a single pawn. They thought this video would be the silver bullet in a courtroom, the undeniable proof that Wesley's mind had completely deteriorated. But they were entirely oblivious to the environment around them. Mounted directly behind Megan on the far wall was a massive antique gilded mirror that Corinne had imported from Italy. From my slumped position in the armchair, I had a perfect unobstructed view of the mirror's reflection. I slowly lifted my head, letting the feigned confusion instantly vanish from my eyes. I looked directly into the mirror, my gaze piercing straight into the lens of Megan's recording phone. While Aaron continued to babble his fake apologies, I let a sharp, cold, and entirely lucid smirk spread across my face. It was a chilling expression of absolute dominance. I held that deadly smirk for 3 full seconds, ensuring her camera captured the undeniable truth. They were not building a case for my medical guardianship. They were documenting their own malicious conspiracy to defraud me, and I had just set the ultimate defamation trap. 2 days after my staged performance in the armchair, the doorbell rang exactly at 10 in the morning. I was sitting at the kitchen island sipping my black coffee and reviewing the latest commercial foreclosure documents Jonathan had sent over. I did not bother checking the security cameras. I knew exactly who it was. I unlocked the heavy front door to find Megan and Aaron standing on my porch, accompanied by a tall, nervous-looking man holding a scuffed leather briefcase. He wore a poorly tailored gray suit and a stethoscope draped around his neck like a cheap Halloween prop. "Wesley," Megan said, pushing past me into the foyer with her usual unwarranted authority. "We brought a specialist to see you. This is Dr. Eris Thorne. He is a premier neurologist in the Atlanta area. We told him about your little episode the other day, and he graciously agreed to do a home evaluation." Aaron stood behind her, refusing to meet my eyes, staring intently at the hardwood floor. Dr. Thorne stepped forward, extending a clammy hand. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Wesley. I know these evaluations can feel intrusive, but your family is deeply concerned about your cognitive decline. We just want to ask you a few simple questions and have you sign a standard medical release form so we can get you the specialized care you desperately need." He pulled a thick stack of papers from his briefcase and placed them on my dining table, tapping a pen against the signature line. They were moving in for the kill. I did not take the pen. I did not sit down. I simply picked up the top sheet of paper and adjusted my reading glasses. It was not a standard medical release form. It was a comprehensive declaration of mental incompetence, legally binding and aggressively worded, designed to hand total medical and financial guardianship directly over to my son. I read the document slowly, letting the silence stretch until the tension in the room became physically suffocating. Megan shifted her weight, crossing her arms defensively. "Just sign it, Wesley," she urged, her voice tight and impatient. "It is for your own good." I lowered the paperwork and looked directly at the man masquerading as a medical professional. "Tell me, Dr. Thorne," I began, my voice dropping the fragile, confused act completely and returning to the sharp, commanding baritone of a corporate chief executive. "Where exactly did you complete your neurology residency?" The man blinked clearly, caught off guard by my sudden lucidity. "I completed my training at Emory University," he stammered, shifting his briefcase to his other hand. "Emory," I repeated, nodding slowly. "That is a phenomenal institution. Then you must be highly familiar with the Georgia Composite Medical Board. What is your state medical license number?" Dr. Thorne froze. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He glanced nervously at Megan, who was suddenly gripping her designer purse with white knuckles. "I do not carry my license number memorized, Wesley," he managed to say, forcing a weak, patronizing chuckle. "But I assure you I am fully accredited." I stepped closer to him, invading his personal space, forcing him to look up into my eyes. "You do not carry it memorized," I stated flatly. "That is fascinating. Because I spent 30 years handling commercial medical facility construction contracts across the entire state of Georgia. Every single licensed physician I have ever negotiated with knows their board number by heart. It is a specific identifier issued by the state, and the fact that you cannot provide yours tells me everything I need to know." The man swallowed hard, a heavy bead of sweat forming at his hairline. Before he could attempt another lie, I held up the fraudulent declaration of incompetence. "Let me educate you on exactly what you are attempting to do here today," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a whip. "By presenting this document with the intent to declare a perfectly sane individual legally incompetent to secure his financial assets, you are actively participating in a conspiracy to commit elder fraud. Under federal law, specifically, Title 18 of the United States Code Section 1347, healthcare fraud carries a penalty of up to 10 years in federal prison. If you falsely sign your name to this evaluation, you are also committing mail and wire fraud. My attorney, Jonathan Vargas, has the Federal Bureau of Investigation on speed dial. I will personally ensure that not only do you never practice medicine again, assuming you ever legally did, but that you spend the next decade eating terrible food in a federal penitentiary." The color completely drained from Dr. Thorne's face. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a speeding freight train. The heavy bead of sweat at his hairline broke loose and rolled down the side of his pale cheek. He looked frantically at Aaron, then at Megan, his eyes wide with sheer terror. "You told me he was senile," the man hissed at my daughter-in-law, completely abandoning his professional facade. "You told me he did not know his own name. You said this was going to be a simple signature collection for a confused old man." Megan stepped forward, her face flushed red with anger and extreme embarrassment. He is senile, she yelled, pointing an accusing finger at me. He called me Corinne yesterday. I have it all on video. He is losing his mind. The man shook his head violently, snatching his fraudulent paperwork right out of my hand. He is not crazy, lady. He shot back, his voice trembling with genuine fear. He just cited federal criminal code perfectly. Do you have any idea what you have dragged me into? I am not going to federal prison for you or your husband. Aaron finally spoke up, stepping between his furious wife and the panicked man. Calm down, everyone, he pleaded, holding his hands up in a desperate attempt to regain control. We can just renegotiate the terms. We can figure this out together. There is no renegotiation, I interjected, crossing my arms over my chest. The man standing in my foyer realized he was trapped in a room with a ruthless corporate shark who knew the law better than most attorneys. He was not dealing with a fragile old man. He was dealing with a predator who had just caught him trespassing in his territory. His breathing became shallow and rapid. He realized his entire life was on the line for a meager payout from a desperate, greedy couple. Dr. Thorne did not hesitate for another second. He shoved his papers roughly into his scuffed briefcase, snapped the brass latches shut, and practically sprinted toward my front door. I am leaving, he shouted over his shoulder, not even bothering to look back. Do not ever contact me again. If the feds call me, I am telling them everything about your setup. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him, shaking the framed pictures on the hallway wall. The silence that followed was absolute. I slowly turned my gaze to Aaron and Megan. They stood frozen in my foyer, completely stripped of their smug superiority. The grand plan to lock me away in a facility and steal my fortune had just evaporated before their very eyes. I looked at the son I had raised and the woman who had poisoned his mind, feeling nothing but a profound, icy disdain. Get out of my house, I commanded, pointing a single steady finger toward the door. And do not ever mistake my patience for weakness again. They did not say a single word. They turned around and walked out into the blazing Georgia sun, humiliated, defeated, and completely unaware of the absolute financial devastation I was about to unleash on them. The heavy oak door had barely clicked shut behind them before the brutal reality of their situation began to set in. Aaron and Megan were in absolute freefall. With my single phone call to the commercial bank, their entire financial ecosystem had been completely obliterated. The corporate credit cards were frozen solid, the company checking accounts were inaccessible, and their monthly executive salary draws had been permanently suspended pending the forensic audit. But their biggest problem was the $300,000 commercial loan Aaron had fraudulently secured using my forged signature. That specific private lender was not a traditional patient banking institution. They were a high-risk commercial firm that demanded exorbitant monthly servicing fees, and Aaron had just missed his very first payment. My private investigator, coordinated through Jonathan Vargas, tracked my son's every move over the next 48 hours. The reports were pathetic. Aaron was completely backed into a corner. His affluent country club friends suddenly stopped taking his calls when he asked for short-term bridge loans. Megan's wealthy socialite circle vanished the moment she could not pick up the tab at brunch. Desperation makes a weak man do incredibly dangerous things. Jonathan brought me photographs showing Aaron sitting in a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of Atlanta, sweating profusely across the table from a known predatory loan shark. My son was trying to leverage whatever phantom equity he thought he had left to secure a massive cash injection, with a catastrophic interest rate, just to keep his angry wife from packing her designer bags and leaving him. He was willing to dive headfirst into the criminal underworld because he simply did not have a single legitimate dollar to his name. I sat across from Jonathan Vargas in his sleek corner office, looking at the surveillance photos of Aaron begging a street-level thug for cash. We are not going to let him borrow from the underworld, I stated, my voice echoing off the glass walls. If he owes a loan shark, the money leaves the family ecosystem, and I lose my leverage. I want to own him completely. Jonathan leaned back in his heavy leather chair, a sharp, predatory smile spreading across his face. Then we hit him where he actually lives, Wesley. Aaron and Megan's primary residence is a sprawling multi-million-dollar mansion in Buckhead. Because they spend every dime they make on depreciating luxury assets, they only put 10% down when they bought it. They carry a massive, suffocating mortgage with a traditional bank. With Aaron's corporate income suddenly dropping to absolute zero, his debt-to-income ratio is currently radioactive. He is a massive liability to his mortgage lender. I nodded, seeing the brilliant architecture of the trap Jonathan was laying out. We buy the paper, I said. Exactly. Jonathan confirmed, pulling up a fresh digital file on his monitor. We will establish an anonymous corporate shell company right now. We will call it Ironclad Holdings LLC, registered through a registered agent in Delaware to completely mask your identity. Ironclad Holdings will approach Aaron's mortgage lender. Banks are currently desperate to offload high-risk, non-performing residential mortgages to private investment firms to clear their balance sheets. We will offer to purchase the promissory note and the deed of trust for his Buckhead mansion at full market value in pure cash. The bank will gladly take the liquid capital and assign the mortgage debt directly over to Ironclad Holdings. I authorized the maneuver, immediately wiring the necessary millions from my private offshore investment accounts that Aaron never even knew existed. Over the next 72 hours, Jonathan executed a flawless financial military campaign. His team drafted the acquisition contracts, navigated the secondary mortgage market, and ruthlessly negotiated the assignment of the deed. The original bank was absolutely thrilled to wipe Aaron's volatile file from their system. They quietly sold the entire debt to our shell company without ever notifying the homeowner that his mortgage had been traded. Aaron and Megan were entirely oblivious. They were frantically searching for loose cash to keep their luxury cars from being repossessed, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had just been sold to the very man they had tried to lock in a backyard shed. We did not just block their cash flow, we legally purchased the roof over their heads. 3 days later, Jonathan personally delivered a thick, heavy manila envelope to my estate. I took the envelope into my private study, poured myself a neat glass of aged bourbon, and sat down in the deep leather chair behind my desk. The room was perfectly quiet, the late afternoon sun casting long golden shadows across the floor. I opened the clasp and slid the documents out onto the polished wood. They're printed on heavy legal paper and stamped with the official seal of the county clerk was the assignment of deed of trust. I ran my fingers over the crisp black ink. The document explicitly stated that Ironclad Holdings LLC was now the sole legal beneficiary and lien holder of Aaron and Megan's luxury mansion. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt no lingering fatherly sorrow. As I looked at the paperwork that held my son's entire future, a cold, profound sense of satisfaction settled deep into my chest. For years, I had watched Aaron parade around Atlanta, boasting about his massive house, acting as though he were a self-made titan of industry, while secretly siphoning the lifeblood from my company. He had the sheer audacity to sit at a steakhouse and tell me my home was a burden. He and his greedy wife had spent $50,000 building a cheap, uninsulated, unpermitted wooden box in their backyard, intending to force me into it so they could steal my fortune. The poetic justice of this moment was intoxicating. I held the document up to the fading light. They wanted to take my home. Now I literally owned theirs. I possessed the legal right to rip the marble floors right out from under Megan's designer heels. Every night they slept in their silk sheets. Every morning they walked down their grand staircase. They were doing it by my quiet, unyielding permission. The financial transition was absolutely flawless and completely undetectable to the naked eye. Jonathan called me the following morning to confirm that the county recorder's office had officially processed the paperwork. The assignment was a matter of public record buried beneath layers of corporate anonymity that Aaron was far too arrogant and far too ignorant to ever investigate. The trap was permanently sealed shut. I was now the supreme, undisputed creditor of Aaron and Megan. They were no longer dealing with a faceless, forgiving banking institution that might offer a grace period or a payment plan. They were dealing with a ghost who demanded absolute perfection. If Aaron missed his upcoming monthly mortgage payment by a single minute, if his check bounced, or if he fell short by a single dollar, Ironclad Holdings LLC had the immediate legal authority to initiate a ruthless, expedited foreclosure. They were drowning in debt, completely surrounded by enemies of their own making and living on borrowed time. They thought they were the masterminds of a grand conspiracy, but they were nothing more than helpless puppets dancing on the strings I now held firmly in my hands. The silence of my estate was broken on a Tuesday afternoon by the heavy slam of a car door. I watched through the front window as Aaron marched up the stone pathway, gripping the hand of his 8-year-old son, my grandson. I unlocked the front door before Aaron could even ring the bell. He pushed past me into the foyer, his face pale, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. He looked terrible. The tailored suits he usually wore were replaced by a wrinkled button-down shirt, and the arrogant swagger had dissolved into a frantic, nervous energy. But what instantly drew my attention was the boy standing beside him. My grandson looked down at his sneakers, clearly confused and frightened by his father's erratic behavior. "Hey there, little man," I said softly, crouching down to his eye level to offer a reassuring smile. Before the boy could even respond, Aaron yanked him back by the shoulder, stepping between us like a physical barricade. "Do not play the doting grandfather right now." Aaron snapped, his voice trembling with a toxic mixture of fear and rage. "We are not here for a friendly family visit." I stood up slowly, towering over my son, letting the warmth completely drain from my face. Bringing a child into a financial dispute is the absolute lowest tactic a desperate man can employ. "State your business, Aaron," I commanded, keeping my tone deadly flat so as not to scare the boy any further. Aaron practically vibrated with nervous aggression. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled stack of legal documents. I recognized them immediately. They were the listing agreements for my estate and the authorization forms to unfreeze the corporate accounts. "Megan and I have had enough of your paranoid games, Dad," Aaron hissed, waving the papers in my face. "The corporate cards are dead. The bank is breathing down my neck about the commercial loan, and the vendors are threatening to sue me personally. You are going to sign these papers right now. You are going to authorize the sale of this house, transfer the liquid equity into our joint account, and lift the corporate freeze. If you do not, I swear to God, I will make sure you die completely alone." I looked at the papers, then back at my son, absolutely unfazed by his pathetic ultimatum. "And what leverage do you think you possess that would force me to surrender my entire fortune to a thief?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Aaron grabbed his son by the shoulder again, pulling the frightened boy forward. "Him." Aaron spat out, his eyes wide and manic. "This is your leverage. If you do not sign these papers today, if you do not give us the money we need to fix this mess, you will never see him again. Megan and I will pack up, we will move across the country, and we will cut all contact. You will never get another phone call. You will never attend another birthday party. You will die in this massive, empty house, and your grandson will grow up thinking you abandoned him." The sheer depravity of his threat hung in the air like poison. He was actively weaponizing his own flesh and blood to extort cash from his father. He thought he had found the ultimate vulnerability, the one crack in my armor that would force me to capitulate. He genuinely believed that my love for my grandson would override my financial logic and force me to hand over the keys to the kingdom. I stared at Aaron, feeling a profound, terrifying calm wash over me. A man who uses a child as a human shield is not a man at all. He is a coward. "You are attempting to ransom my grandson for a real estate transaction," I stated clearly, ensuring the sheer ugliness of his words was perfectly articulated. Aaron swallowed hard, but he held his ground, fueled by sheer financial desperation. "I am doing what I have to do to protect my family," he fired back defensively. "You are destroying my life. I need that money, Dad. Sign the papers or say goodbye to him forever." I did not reach for the pen. I did not flinch. I just looked at the boy, who was now quietly crying, terrified by the anger radiating from his father. Looking at my grandson, my heart ached in a way it had not since Corinne passed away. The boy was named Dominic, after my own father. My father was a man who worked 3 manual labor jobs just to keep shoes on my feet. A man who taught me that a person's word is their bond, and that family provides shelter, not extortion. When Dominic was born, I held him in my arms in that hospital room and saw the exact same bright, intelligent eyes my father had. He was the only pure thing left in this deeply fractured family. Over the past 8 years, Dominic and I had built a bond that Aaron could never understand or sever. We spent countless Saturday mornings in my woodworking shop sanding down pine blocks and talking about how buildings are constructed from the ground up. He possessed a natural curiosity and a gentle spirit that Megan and Aaron completely ignored in their relentless pursuit of country club status. He was my absolute weakness, and Aaron knew it. Aaron had grown up watching me move mountains to ensure his happiness, and he falsely assumed my love for Dominic would compel me to sign away my life's work. But Aaron failed to understand a fundamental truth about me. I do not negotiate with terrorists, especially not those who share my last name. Protecting Dominic did not mean funding the toxic, fraudulent environment Aaron and Megan were raising him in. It meant dismantling that environment completely so the boy could eventually learn what true integrity looked like. Giving Aaron the money would only enable his criminal behavior and teach Dominic that extortion is a valid tool for survival. I would not allow my father's namesake to be razed by a successful thief. I completely ignored the crumpled papers in Aaron's hand. Instead, I knelt down completely, disregarding my son's aggressive posture, and pulled Dominic into a tight grounding hug. I leaned close to his ear so Aaron could not hear. "Alpha Team, stand strong," I whispered, using the secret code we always used when working on our weekend building projects. "I will see you soon, Dominic. Be brave." I stood up, smoothing my jacket, and locked my eyes onto Aaron with a cold, dead stare. "A father who uses his child as a human shield is a coward," I commanded, my voice echoing off the hardwood floor. "Get out of my house before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." Aaron's face contorted with absolute fury. Realizing his ultimate bargaining chip had completely failed, he lost all remaining control. He grabbed Dominic by the arm, dragging him toward the door. As he turned, he violently swept his arm across the entryway console table. His hand struck a delicate, hand-painted ceramic vase that Corinne had brought back from our 20th anniversary trip to Italy. It crashed onto the marble floor, shattering into 1,000 irreplaceable pieces. Aaron did not even look back as he slammed the heavy front door behind him. I stood alone in the foyer, looking down at the broken remnants of my wife's favorite memory. The final boundary had just been crossed. Aaron was no longer my son. He was just an enemy waiting to be destroyed. 3 days after Aaron shattered my wife's vase, a heavy cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. The sheer audacity of the delivery almost made me laugh out loud in my empty foyer. It was a formal invitation embossed with expensive gold foil welcoming me to a grand guest house dedication and housewarming soiree at Aaron and Megan's Buckhead mansion. Megan had completely bypassed the reality of their frozen corporate cards, their plummeting credit scores, and their desperate financial situation. Instead, she was throwing a massive catered event to publicly legitimize her master plan. By inviting the upper echelon of Atlanta's suburban elite, along with her own affluent, incredibly pretentious parents, she was setting a public stage. She wanted a crowd of wealthy, influential witnesses to applaud her graciousness for housing her supposedly ailing father-in-law in a backyard shed. If the high society crowd accepted the narrative that this unpermitted wooden box was a luxurious, loving sanctuary for a declining patriarch, it would make it infinitely easier for Aaron to present a judge with character witnesses supporting his petition for medical guardianship. They were attempting to weaponize peer pressure and social standing to force my compliance. It was a desperate, incredibly expensive performance designed to mask the fact that they were drowning in high-interest debt and facing imminent foreclosure from my anonymous holding company. But I was not about to decline the invitation. I was going to use their meticulously planned stage to execute a public execution of my own. On the evening of the party, the sprawling lawn of the Buckhead mansion was transformed into a grotesque display of false charity. I parked my truck down the street and approached the house on foot, slipping through the open side gates where the caterers were rushing back and forth. I stood perfectly concealed in the deep shadows of the manicured hedges, watching the spectacle unfold on the massive outdoor patio. The backyard was illuminated by hundreds of twinkling fairy lights. Waiters in crisp white shirts carried silver trays of expensive champagne, completely oblivious to the fact that the very ground they were walking on was legally owned by the man hiding in the bushes. Megan was in her absolute element, holding court near the edge of the swimming pool. She wore a stunning, clearly brand new designer gown that she had undoubtedly charged to one of her maxed-out personal credit cards. She was surrounded by a tight circle of her country club friends and her parents, Arthur and Patricia, who had flown in specifically for the occasion. I listened closely as Megan's voice, amplified by her sheer arrogance, drifted across the patio. "It has been such a difficult transition for our family," she sighed dramatically, placing a hand over her heart in a practiced gesture of fake sorrow. "Wesley is just not himself anymore. He gets terribly confused, wandering around that massive, empty estate looking for blueprints that do not exist. Aaron and I simply could not sleep at night knowing he was all alone with his rapidly declining cognitive state. That is why we invested so much of our own savings into building this beautiful custom suite right here on our property. We want him surrounded by family, safe and secure." The crowd murmured in synchronized, sympathetic approval. Patricia, Megan's mother, nodded proudly, sipping her champagne. "You are an absolute saint, Megan," Patricia declared loudly. Taking in your husband's father when his mind is going is a massive, exhausting burden. Not many young couples would sacrifice their privacy and their hard-earned finances like that. Megan humbly lowered her eyes, eating up the unearned praise like a starving dog. "Oh, Mom, it is our duty. He built a wonderful company, but he simply cannot manage his own life or his complex assets anymore. We are stepping up to protect his legacy." Aaron stood right beside her, nodding solemnly, playing the role of the burdened but dutiful son to perfection. He gestured toward the miserable wooden box sitting at the edge of the property line. "We even installed custom panoramic windows so he can look out at the garden," Aaron lied, smoothly pointing at the cheap, standard-issue vinyl frames that I knew for a fact leaked air. "It cost us an absolute fortune, but Dad deserves the best care in his final years." Arthur clapped Aaron on the shoulder, offering a stern look of patriarchal approval. "It takes a strong man to take the keys away from a failing father," Arthur boomed. "You are doing the right thing, son." She was actively laying the groundwork for the guardianship hearing, poisoning the well of public opinion. She was convincing everyone in that affluent crowd that I was a helpless, paranoid old man who desperately needed to be stripped of his financial autonomy. She was basking in the glow of their admiration, celebrating a victory she had absolutely not earned. I stood in the cool shadows, looking down at my own attire. I had certainly not come dressed as the broken, confused old man they were pitching to their gullible guests. When I received that gold-embossed invitation 3 days ago, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my master bedroom and made a solemn vow to Corinne's memory that I would utterly destroy their narrative. I had pulled out a bespoke charcoal gray 3-piece suit that was tailored specifically for me in Milan. It was the exact suit I wore when I ruthlessly negotiated the largest commercial development contract in Atlanta's history. I paired it with a crisp white silk tie, polished Oxfords that gleamed like glass, and my father's vintage gold pocket watch secured to my vest. My posture was impeccably straight, my shoulders broad, and my mind sharper than it had been in 3 decades. In my right hand, I held a slim black leather briefcase. It did not contain construction bids or retirement brochures. It contained the absolute, unmitigated annihilation of Aaron and Megan's entire existence. Inside that briefcase was the forged power of attorney, the indisputable documentation of the fraudulent $300,000 commercial loan, the complete forensic accounting audit, showing 2 years of their blatant embezzlement, and the most devastating weapon of all, the fully executed assignment of deed of trust, proving that Ironclad Holdings, LLC, owned this very mansion. I had coordinated heavily with Jonathan Vargas earlier that afternoon. The trap was fully loaded, the legal triggers were primed, and all that was required was for me to step out of the dark and pull the pin. I tightened my grip on the leather handle of my briefcase, took one final deep breath of the humid evening air, and stepped out from the darkness of the hedges. I did not shuffle. I did not hesitate. I walked onto the illuminated patio with the heavy, undeniable authority of a titan. My leather shoes clicked sharply against the imported stone pavers, a slow, deliberate, and commanding rhythm that immediately caught the attention of a nearby waiter. A few guests turned to look, their polite, gossiping smiles instantly faltering. The murmurs of conversation began to die off in a cascading wave rippling across the entire backyard until an oppressive, suffocating silence fell over the party. Megan was mid-sentence, laughing at a joke her father had just made when she finally noticed the sudden, eerie quiet. She turned around, her champagne flute freezing halfway to her lips. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost facing her own executioner. Aaron emerged from the crowd, his jaw dropping open in sheer horror as he took in my immaculate appearance. I was not the frail, senile victim they had just spent an hour describing. I stood before them, radiating absolute, uncompromising power, a king arriving to reclaim his stolen throne. The backyard was completely paralyzed, every single eye locked on me. The suffocating silence that blanketed the backyard was only broken by the soft, nervous clinking of ice against crystal. I continued my deliberate march through the sea of horrified guests. The crowd physically parted for me, stepping aside as if making way for a phantom they had been explicitly told was locked away in a state of mental decay. At the far end of the pool, Megan stood on a raised cedar deck that was clearly constructed to serve as her personal stage for the evening. She was clutching a silver wireless microphone in her trembling, manicured hand. Just moments before my arrival, she had been putting on the performance of a lifetime. I could still see the fake, forced tears glistening on her heavily powdered cheeks. She had been actively weeping crocodile tears for her affluent audience, playing the role of the exhausted, deeply burdened caretaker. When her wide, panicked eyes locked onto my tailored suit and perfectly composed posture, her brain desperately tried to salvage the crumbling narrative. She gripped the microphone tighter, her knuckles turning bone white, and forced a wavering theatrical sob into the speakers. "Oh, Wesley," she cried out, her voice dripping with a sickly, fabricated sympathy that echoed across the lawn. "You wandered out of the main house all by yourself. Everyone, please do not be alarmed. His condition makes him so terribly confused and disoriented at this hour. We just need to get him safely to his new room before he gets overwhelmed." She actually wiped a fake tear from her eye, looking out at the crowd as if silently begging for their pity. She was doubling down, banking on the hope that I would somehow stumble or play into her twisted medical fantasy. I did not stop walking. I did not break my steady, measured stride until my polished Oxfords hit the bottom step of the cedar deck. I walked right up to the elevated platform, my posture completely towering over her shrinking frame. Megan instinctively took a half-step backward, her designer heels scraping against the wood. The sheer proximity to my cold, calculating stare completely shattered the last remnants of her fabricated confidence. I did not yell. I did not raise a hand in anger. I simply reached out with smooth, undeniable authority and wrapped my fingers around the sleek metal of the microphone. For a fraction of a second, she tried to maintain her grip, her manicured nails digging into the casing. But she was a coward masquerading as a titan, and the moment I applied a fraction of pressure, she surrendered it immediately, stepping away as if the metal had suddenly burned her skin. I turned my back to her, entirely dismissing her existence, and faced the crowd of Atlanta's suburban elite. I tapped the top of the microphone once with my index finger. The sharp, resonant thump echoed through the high-end sound system they had undoubtedly rented on credit. The backyard was so silent you could hear the water cycling through the swimming pool filters. "Good evening," I said. My voice did not shake. It did not waver. It resonated through the speakers with a deep, rich, and commanding baritone that instantly demanded absolute respect. It was the precise, powerful cadence of a man who had spent 4 decades dominating commercial boardrooms, negotiating multi-million-dollar development contracts, and ruthlessly crushing his corporate competitors. "I am Wesley." I continued, letting my sharp gaze slowly pan across the sea of designer dresses and tailored suits, making direct eye contact with as many of Megan's wealthy guests as possible. And despite the incredibly creative fiction, my daughter-in-law was just spoon-feeding you, I assure you, I have not wandered away from anywhere. I know exactly where I am. I know exactly what day it is. And I know exactly what kind of malicious, fraudulent circus is being orchestrated on my property. The crowd collectively gasped. Several women instinctively covered their mouths with their hands while the men shifted uncomfortably in their expensive loafers. They were looking at a man standing in a bespoke Milanese suit wearing a vintage gold pocket watch, speaking with the brutal, undeniable clarity of an apex predator. The cognitive dissonance was actively breaking their brains. They had been invited here to pity a drooling, senile old man who needed to be locked in a backyard shed. Instead, they were staring down the barrel of a fully lucid, razor-sharp corporate executive who was clearly about to detonate a bomb in the middle of their cocktail party. "I am not suffering from cognitive decline." I projected, my voice dripping with absolute authority. "I am, however, suffering from a profound lack of patience for thieves who smile in my face while attempting to pick my pocket." From the corner of my eye, I saw Aaron finally snap out of his paralyzed stupor. The sheer panic of having his elaborate criminal charade publicly dismantled in front of his in-laws and his country club peers finally overrode his cowardice. He dropped his champagne flute onto a passing waiter's tray and aggressively shoved his way through the tightly packed crowd. He rushed toward the cedar deck, his face flushed a furious, blotchy red, desperately trying to salvage the narrative before I completely destroyed his life. "Dad?" "That is enough," Aaron shouted, his voice cracking as he bounded up the wooden steps. He reached out his hands, grasping toward my shoulders, attempting to physically corral me. "You are having an episode. You are confused and you are embarrassing yourself in front of our guests. Let us get you back inside to rest before you say something you regret." He was no more than 2 feet away from me, his hands outstretched, ready to play the physical role of the protective caretaker. He thought he could overpower me with fake concern. I did not step back. I did not raise the microphone to address his lie. I simply turned my head, locking my eyes entirely on his. I channeled every ounce of the cold, ruthless fury I had been stockpiling since the moment I discovered that forged power of attorney. I delivered a glare so lethally sharp, so completely devoid of any paternal warmth that it acted as a physical barricade. Aaron froze instantly. His outstretched hands stopped dead in the air, trembling violently. He hit an invisible wall of pure, unadulterated dominance. "Take one more step toward me, Aaron," I whispered, my voice dropping so low it was only audible to him and the terrified woman standing behind him, "and you will leave this patio in federal handcuffs. I promise you that." All the blood completely drained from his face. His arrogant defensive posture instantly collapsed, shrinking him down into the frightened, incompetent little boy he had always truly been. His legs refused to move forward. He was completely nailed to the wooden deck, suffocated by the gravity of his own impending destruction. Having completely neutralized my son with a single look, I slowly turned back to face the captivated, utterly silent audience. The wealthy socialites and arrogant parents who had just spent the last hour judging my fabricated demise were now hanging on my every breath. I reached down to the polished wooden podium where Megan had rested her notes. I placed my slim black leather briefcase onto the surface and popped the brass latches with a sharp synchronized click that echoed loudly into the microphone. Megan and Aaron have gone to tremendous lengths and incredible expense tonight to celebrate my forced transition into that unpermitted, structurally compromised wooden box sitting at the edge of this property. I declared, my voice rising with absolute chilling clarity. They have asked for your applause. They have asked for your pity. They have asked for your blind validation. I paused, letting my hand rest heavily on the open lid of my briefcase. But before I surrender my estate and move into that shed, I announced, pulling a thick stack of forensic accounting documents and bank records from the leather interior. "I think we should all look over a few numbers together." I raised my left hand just an inch above the podium, giving the subtle prearranged signal. From the back of the illuminated patio, standing inconspicuously near the expensive audiovisual equipment Megan had rented to display her obnoxious slideshow of fake family memories, Jonathan Vargas stepped out of the shadows. My brilliant attorney moved with the swift, calculated precision of a military strike. He pushed past the confused teenage audiovisual technician, completely ignoring the boy's weak protests, and unceremoniously yanked the main display cable right out of Megan's presentation laptop. Jonathan immediately plugged the thick cord directly into his own encrypted device. The massive 100-inch outdoor projector screen set up beside the swimming pool flickered violently for a fraction of a second. The oversized saccharine title card reading "Welcome to Wesley's Sanctuary" vanished into the dark night. In its place, the blinding, stark white glow of a forensic accounting dashboard illuminated the entire backyard, casting harsh shadows across the faces of the wealthy attendees. Jonathan did not pause to ask for permission. He hit a single key, and the first slide of our devastating presentation maximized across the enormous canvas. The sudden burst of brilliant light drew every single eye away from me and directly toward the giant screen. The trap was fully sprung, and the visual evidence of my son's catastrophic greed was now broadcasting in high definition to everyone they had ever tried to impress in this city. Let us begin with the corporate ledger. I projected into the microphone, my voice echoing off the brick facade of the mansion. Behind me, the screen displayed a colossal high-resolution spreadsheet detailing 2 solid years of blatant, unchecked embezzlement. You see, my son and his lovely wife have been actively using my commercial construction firm as their own personal slush fund. I directed the crowd's attention to the highlighted red rows. That $12,000 line item for site consultation was actually a luxury ski vacation in Aspen. The $2,000 monthly material transport lease pays for the luxury SUV currently parked in the driveway. Spa treatments, designer retail sprees, and high-end dining have been systematically drained from the lifeblood of the company I built from the ground up with my late wife. The crowd stared in stunned silence as Jonathan clicked to the next slide. A massive scanned document appeared featuring the bold logo of a private commercial lending firm. "But petty theft is not why we are here tonight," I continued, tightening my grip on the podium edges. "Petty theft does not fund this level of desperate, panicked extravagance. What you see right now is a formal promissory note for a $300,000 high-interest commercial loan. Aaron took out this massive debt less than a month ago, leveraging an industrial warehouse that I own outright. He routed every single penny of that cash directly into a private joint checking account he shares exclusively with Megan. The funds were completely vaporized to maintain the pathetic illusion of their wealth, leaving a massive lien on a property he has absolutely no legal right to leverage. Jonathan hit the spacebar one more time. The screen transitioned to the final, most damning piece of evidence. It was a blown-up, crystal-clear scan of the general durable power of attorney. The document Megan's real estate broker had foolishly handed me days earlier was now 20 feet tall, towering over the swimming pool. I paused, letting the sheer magnitude of the legal document wash over the guests. For Aaron to secure that illegal commercial loan, and for Megan to attempt to forcefully sell my primary $1.8 million estate out from under me, they needed my permission, I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerous icy register. But since I never gave it, they decided to simply invent it. I pointed a steady finger at the giant signature block projected on the screen. I want every business owner, every lawyer, and every investor standing in this backyard to look very closely at that signature. It is a complete and undeniable forgery. My own flesh and blood sat down at a desk, maliciously forged his father's name on a binding legal document, and committed a severe federal felony just to steal my home and fund his wife's unquenchable thirst for status. They invited you here tonight to applaud their fake charity, all while standing on a foundation built entirely on federal wire fraud and identity theft. The reaction from the affluent crowd was instantaneous and utterly devastating. The polite, restrained silence shattered into a chaotic chorus of horrified gasps, sharp whispers, and absolute disgust. These were prominent country club members, local politicians, and wealthy suburbanites who guarded their own reputations with ruthless intensity. Seeing the undeniable proof of federal fraud projected in 20-foot letters made them physically recoil. Several guests immediately set their champagne flutes down on the nearest tables and took deliberate, noticeable steps backward, actively distancing themselves from Aaron and Megan as if the couple had suddenly contracted a highly contagious disease. No one wants to be photographed at a cocktail party mingling with soon-to-be convicted felons. I looked down at Megan. The flawless, confident socialite who had just been basking in the adoration of her peers was completely and totally ruined. The perfect mask she wore to manipulate the world had violently shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Her face was ashen, her jaw trembling so uncontrollably she could not even form a coherent word to defend herself. She looked frantically toward her wealthy friends, her eyes silently begging for an ounce of the sympathy she had been hoarding all night. But there was absolutely no pity left for her. The women she played tennis with were whispering furiously to their husbands, shooting her glances of pure, unadulterated contempt. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, shrinking down into her expensive designer gown, as the crushing weight of public humiliation finally broke her spine. Aaron remained completely paralyzed on the wooden deck, staring up at the giant forged signature that guaranteed his impending prison sentence. He was sweating profusely, trapped in a nightmare of his own making, unable to fight or flee. They were completely exposed, stripped bare before the exact society they had destroyed their own family to impress. I reached over and closed the lid of my slim leather briefcase. The sharp metallic snap of the brass latches cut right through the frantic murmurs of the crowd, bringing the patio back to a rigid, highly attentive silence. I stepped away from the podium, standing tall and unyielding at the edge of the cedar deck. I looked directly down at Aaron, making sure my voice carried absolute, unwavering finality through the microphone. You stood in a fancy restaurant and asked me why I would not simply pack my things and move into that miserable, unpermitted box you built in your backyard, I said, every syllable dripping with lethal contempt. You claimed it was an act of love. You claimed it was a sanctuary. But the truth is, it was built with stolen cash to hide your massive inadequacies as a man and to fund a lifestyle neither of you ever earned. I locked my eyes onto his, delivering the final fatal blow that would echo in his mind for the rest of his miserable life. Because I do not have the habit of living in the proceeds of a fraud. The ringing echo of my final words had barely faded into the humid Atlanta night when the illusion of high society decorum completely shattered. Arthur Megan's father shoved his way through the paralyzed crowd, his face flushed a deep, violent crimson. His wife Patricia was right behind him, her designer heels clicking frantically against the stone pavers. They marched up to the cedar deck with the blinding entitlement of people who had never been told no in their entire privileged lives. Arthur pointed a thick, shaking finger directly at my chest. "How dare you come into my daughter's home and spew these outrageous lies?" he bellowed, his voice cracking with unchecked rage. "You are nothing but a bitter, resentful old man trying to destroy a beautiful marriage because you cannot handle giving up control. You are slandering my daughter in front of her peers." Patricia stepped up beside him, crossing her arms defensively. "We know exactly what you are doing, Wesley," she hissed, her tone dripping with venom. "You have always resented Megan. You always thought she was not good enough for your son, and now you are fabricating this ridiculous, malicious display to ruin her reputation. This is targeted harassment. We will sue you for every dime you have left. We will take you to court for defamation, and we will win." They stood shoulder to shoulder, a unified front of white suburban arrogance, completely convinced that their volume and their status could somehow override the glaring 20-foot projection of federal fraud beaming behind them. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch at Arthur's pointing finger or Patricia's empty legal threats. I stood perfectly still, letting their misplaced outrage burn itself out against the cold, unyielding reality of the situation. When Arthur finally paused to catch his breath, his chest heaving beneath his expensive blazer, I looked at him with an expression of profound, chilling pity. "You threaten me with defamation, Arthur," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble that commanded immediate silence from the entire patio. "Defamation requires the presentation of falsehoods. Everything projected on that screen behind me is a documented, verifiable, and legally actionable fact. But since you are so eager to jump onto the sinking ship with your daughter, I suppose I should show you the anchor she tied around your ankles." I turned back to the polished wooden podium and popped the brass latches of my black leather briefcase for the second time tonight. I reached past the forensic accounting reports and the forged power of attorney. From the very bottom of the case, I extracted a heavy red manila folder. I held it in my hand for a brief moment, letting the weight of what was inside settle over the deck. Arthur and Patricia watched me, their aggressive posturing faltering just a fraction as they realized I was not acting like a man intimidated by their threats. I stepped forward and dropped the red folder onto the cocktail table right in front of them. It hit the glass surface with a sharp, heavy thud that made Patricia jump. "Open it," I commanded, my eyes locked dead on Arthur. "If you are so absolutely certain of your daughter's flawless character, if you truly believe I am simply a resentful old man fabricating evidence out of thin air, then open that file and read the documents for yourself." Arthur glared at me, his jaw clenching tightly, but he reached out and snatched the folder off the table. He ripped it open with a defiant sneer, ready to scoff at whatever paperwork I had provided. Patricia leaned over his shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she tried to make sense of the dense legal text on the first page. I watched the exact moment the arrogant defiance began to drain from their faces. It was a slow, agonizing realization. The bold black letters at the top of the document were not from my commercial construction firm. They were not from Aaron's fraudulent commercial lender. They were from the exact private wealth management group that Arthur and Patricia had used to store their entire life savings. Arthur's hands began to shake violently. The paper rattled in his grip as his eyes darted back and forth across the highlighted sections. "What is this?" he breathed out, his voice suddenly hollow and weak. "What am I looking at?" I took a slow, deliberate step closer to them, invading their personal space just enough to let them feel the absolute gravity of their daughter's betrayal. "You are looking at the exact reason why you should never blindly trust a thief," I stated coldly. "Even when that thief shares your last name and wears a designer gown paid for with stolen money. While you were busy praising your daughter's saintly charity and threatening to sue me for defamation, Jonathan Vargas was conducting a comprehensive deep dive audit into every single financial maneuver Megan has made over the last 2 years," I explained, projecting my voice so the remaining guests could hear the absolute devastation. We needed to know exactly how they managed to maintain their lavish lifestyle before Aaron committed federal wire fraud. "It turns out, Arthur, your daughter did not just target my company. 6 months ago, Megan approached your wealth management firm. She utilized the emergency financial proxy you granted her when you had your heart surgery last year. Do you remember that proxy, Arthur? The one she swore she would only use if you were incapacitated." Arthur's face turned a sickening shade of gray. He could not speak. He could only stare at the paperwork as I outlined his financial execution. "She did not use it for a medical emergency," I continued relentlessly. "She used your proxy to leverage your entire fully vested retirement portfolio as collateral for a high-yield short-term vanity loan. She drained hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity from your lifetime of hard work to cover the massive credit card debts she accrued buying luxury cars, designer wardrobes, and lavish vacations. She effectively mortgaged your future to finance her present. And because she and Aaron are now entirely broke, completely cut off from my corporate accounts, and facing imminent foreclosure on this very mansion that short-term loan is currently in default, the bank is not going to politely ask for their money back. They are going to aggressively liquidate your retirement accounts by the end of the business week. She did not just rob me, Arthur. She completely bankrupted you. She smiled in your face, poured you champagne, and accepted your praise tonight, fully knowing that you will be answering calls from debt collectors on Monday morning. Your golden years have been entirely liquidated to fund her country club membership. The color completely vanished from Patricia's face. She let out a sharp, choked gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth as the staggering reality of their financial ruin crashed down upon her. Arthur physically staggered backward, his legs giving out as he collapsed heavily into a nearby patio chair. The red folder slipped from his trembling hands, the documents scattering across the stone pavers like a death sentence. Megan broke away from her paralyzed stance near the projector screen and rushed toward them. "Mom, Dad, please let me explain." She sobbed hysterically, dropping to her knees beside Arthur's chair. "It was just a temporary loan. We were going to pay it back. I swear we were going to fix it." Arthur slowly lifted his head. He did not look at her with the protective love of a father. He looked at her with pure, unadulterated revulsion. "Do not call me Dad." He rasped, his voice shaking with absolute disgust. "You stole our entire lives. You are no daughter of mine. Do not ever speak to us again." Patricia turned her back, completely sobbing into her hands. Megan collapsed onto the deck, entirely abandoned, wailing as her perfect world finally burned to ash. Megan's pathetic wailing was the only sound echoing across the illuminated patio, but it did not last long. In the distance, cutting through the thick, humid Atlanta night, a sharp, rising wail pierced the air. It was not a single siren. It was a coordinated chorus of heavy emergency vehicles rapidly approaching the affluent Buckhead neighborhood. The remaining socialites exchanged nervous glances as the unmistakable screech of tires halted violently at the front of the estate. Seconds later, the harsh, rhythmic flash of red and blue emergency lights began to strobe aggressively against the brick facade of the mansion, casting frantic, colorful shadows across the surface of the swimming pool. The heavy wooden side gates, which had previously allowed caterers to discreetly enter the backyard, were abruptly shoved open with commanding force. A team of stern-faced individuals marched onto the patio. Leading the pack was the local county sheriff, his hand resting casually but firmly near his duty belt. Flanking him were 3 men and 1 woman dressed in sharp, unassuming tactical windbreakers, bearing the bold yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Right beside the lead federal agent walked my attorney, Jonathan Vargas, looking as calm and collected as a seasoned general overseeing a conquered battlefield. The armed officers did not pause to ask for the host. They bypassed the terrified caterers and the paralyzed elite guests, making a direct, unyielding beeline straight for the cedar deck where Aaron and Megan were trapped. The ultimate consequences of their arrogance had finally arrived at their doorstep. The lead federal agent stepped onto the wooden deck, his posture radiating absolute authority. He reached inside his tactical windbreaker and retrieved a thick stack of folded legal documents entirely different from the ones I had just presented on the projector. "Aaron Wesley," the agent announced, his voice projecting clearly across the silent, captivated audience. "I have in my possession a federal arrest warrant issued by the United States District Court. You are being taken into custody on multiple felony charges, including but not limited to federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud." Aaron physically recoiled as if he had been struck by lightning. His eyes darted wildly between the federal agents, the sheriff, and my unwavering stance at the edge of the patio. "No, wait," Aaron stammered, raising his trembling hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "There is a massive misunderstanding here. I am the chief executive officer of the commercial firm. I had implied authorization for those transactions. You cannot just come into my home and arrest me based on a family dispute." The federal agent did not flinch. He took a deliberate step forward, completely unfazed by my son's desperate, stuttering defense. "This is not a family dispute, Aaron," the agent clarified coldly. You walked into a private commercial lending institution and secured a $300,000 high-interest loan against an industrial property you do not legally own. You executed this transaction using a deliberately forged general durable power of attorney. We have the fraudulent documents you submitted. We have the corresponding bank transfer receipts routing those stolen funds into your private joint accounts. And we have sworn statements from the notary public confirming their seal was digitally altered. You crossed state banking lines with those wire transfers, elevating your petty theft to a federal crime carrying severe mandatory minimum sentencing. The agent turned his sharp gaze toward the floor, looking directly down at Megan, who was still clutching her ruined designer gown, trembling violently beside her father's abandoned chair. Megan Wesley. The agent continued, his tone devoid of any sympathy. You are also named in this federal indictment as a co-conspirator. Your signature is present on the receiving joint accounts, and financial audits confirm you personally authorized the expenditure of the stolen commercial funds to cover your private luxury debts. Furthermore, local authorities have a secondary warrant regarding the fraudulent leveraging of a private retirement portfolio belonging to Arthur and Patricia. The sheer weight of the charges hung over the backyard like an anvil. The elite crowd of onlookers shrank back even further, horrified by the staggering laundry list of severe felonies being read aloud at a housewarming party. Aaron shook his head frantically, his tailored shirt now completely soaked in a cold, terrified sweat. "Dad, tell them," Aaron pleaded, finally looking at me with eyes full of absolute naked desperation. "Tell them you gave me verbal permission. Tell them it was an aggressive business strategy. You cannot let them take me to federal prison." I looked at the man who had forged my name, stolen my assets, and tried to lock me in a backyard shed. "I gave you a multi-million-dollar empire, Aaron," I said with a chilling finality. "You chose to trade it for a jail cell. I cannot save you from the consequences of your own greed." The reality of the federal indictment finally snapped Megan out of her paralyzed state. The instinct for pure, selfish survival kicked in, completely obliterating any remaining loyalty she held for her husband. She scrambled to her feet, her expensive heels slipping wildly on the cedar deck, and pointed a shaking finger directly at Aaron. "I did not know anything about a forged signature," Megan shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the yard. "I am just his wife. He handles all the corporate finances. He told me the company was doing exceptionally well and that we had surplus capital. I never asked him to steal money or leverage any warehouses. He is a liar and a thief. You need to arrest him, not me." I had absolutely no idea what he was doing behind closed doors. Aaron stared at his wife, utterly betrayed, his jaw dropping as she actively tried to feed him to the federal agents to save her own skin. But Jonathan Vargas simply adjusted his glasses and stepped forward. "Actually, Megan, that is a verifiable lie," Jonathan stated calmly. He pulled a small digital audio recorder from his suit pocket and held it up for the entire patio to see. "My client Wesley anticipated your sudden onset of amnesia. 2 days ago, when you brought a fraudulent neurologist into his home to declare him mentally incompetent, you loudly and explicitly complained about his financial lockdown. But more importantly, we recovered security footage and audio from your vehicle confirming your active participation in reviewing the forged documents outside the lawyer's office last week." Jonathan pressed a button, and Megan's own voice played clearly over the small speaker, complaining about needing the fake contracts finalized to secure the commercial chain and kick the old man out. Megan gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. She had unknowingly provided the exact verbal confession required to cement her role as a willing, active co-conspirator in the federal fraud case. There was no escape. The federal agent gave a swift, silent nod to his tactical team. The officers moved in with practiced efficiency. There was a sharp metallic click that cut through the humid night air as heavy steel handcuffs were snapped forcefully around Aaron's wrists. A female agent stepped up behind Megan, securing her arms behind her back with equal precision. Megan began to sob uncontrollably, the expensive fabric of her gown tearing slightly as she struggled against the unyielding grip of the federal officer. Aaron offered no resistance. His shoulders slumped forward in total crushing defeat, his eyes staring blankly at the wooden floorboards. The agents turned them around and marched them straight through the center of the illuminated patio. The crowd of wealthy socialites, country club friends, and estranged parents parted in absolute terrified silence, watching the disgraced couple take their final, humiliating walk of shame. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers waiting in the driveway illuminated their tear-stained faces. I stood tall on the cedar deck, watching the heavy doors of the federal transport vehicles slam shut, permanently closing the chapter on their reign of greed. 72 hours later, the heavy iron gates of the federal detention center slammed shut behind Aaron and Megan. They had managed to scrape together just enough funds through a sleazy, high-interest bail bondsman to secure their temporary release pending trial. There were no luxury SUVs waiting for them outside the precinct, no sympathetic country club friends offering a comfortable ride. They were forced to take a cramped, foul-smelling city cab back to the affluent Buckhead neighborhood, sitting in suffocating silence as the reality of their impending criminal prosecution weighed heavily on their shoulders. They looked thoroughly defeated. Megan's hair was a tangled, greasy mess, her designer gown swapped for drab, oversized holding cell sweats, and Aaron's posture was entirely broken. They just wanted to crawl into their custom king-sized bed, lock the heavy doors, and hide from the world that had just watched them get hauled away in handcuffs. But as the cab turned the corner onto their exclusive tree-lined street, the driver abruptly slammed on the brakes. Aaron looked out the smudged passenger window and let out a strangled, horrifying gasp. Piled unceremoniously on the immaculate green curb, stretching for 30 feet across the pristine suburban sidewalk, was their entire superficial life. Velvet love seats, expensive golf clubs, boxes of Megan's designer shoes, and massive flat-screen televisions were stacked in a chaotic, humiliating mountain of debris. A crew of muscular men in matching gray work shirts were actively carrying the last of their custom mahogany dining chairs out the front door, dumping them callously onto the growing pile of discarded wealth. Aaron threw a crumpled $20 bill at the cab driver and scrambled out of the back seat, sprinting up the cobblestone driveway with Megan stumbling frantically behind him. "Hey!" Aaron screamed, his voice cracking with a pathetic mixture of exhaustion and blind rage. "Put that down right now. You are trespassing. I am calling the police. This is my property." He charged up the grand front steps, ready to physically assault the nearest mover. But a pair of broad-shouldered private security contractors stepped smoothly into his path, crossing their arms like impenetrable stone walls. Standing directly behind them, positioned at the top of the marble entryway, with a leather clipboard resting casually in his hand, was Jonathan Vargas. My brilliant attorney looked down at my son with an expression of absolute clinical detachment. "You do not need to call the police, Aaron," Jonathan stated, his voice carrying effortlessly over the noise of the moving crew. "They have already been notified of the eviction protocol, and they have explicitly authorized us to clear the premises." Aaron stopped dead in his tracks, his chest heaving aggressively as he stared up at the lawyer. "Eviction," he sputtered, his face turning a chaotic shade of purple. "You cannot evict me. I own this mansion. I have a mortgage with a legitimate bank. You cannot just throw my wife's belongings onto the street without a formal court order." Jonathan slowly descended the first 2 marble steps, maintaining a safe but dominant distance. "You did have a mortgage," Aaron Jonathan corrected smoothly, flipping a crisp page on his clipboard. "But as I am sure you vividly recall, your corporate income was reduced to 0, and you failed to make your primary servicing payment this month. Furthermore, your highly public arrest for federal wire fraud triggered a standard moral turpitude and criminal liability acceleration clause buried deep in the fine print of your original loan agreement. The entity that purchased your debt last week, Ironclad Holdings LLC, exercised its absolute legal right to call the entire balance of the loan due immediately. When you failed to produce $3 million in cash by midnight yesterday, they initiated a rapid commercial foreclosure. The county judge reviewed your ongoing federal indictment, recognized the extreme flight risk and the complete lack of verifiable income, and granted an expedited writ of possession this morning. The locks have been changed. The alarm codes have been reset. You do not own this property anymore. You are officially trespassing on private corporate real estate." Megan let out a shrill, devastated wail, dropping to her knees on the cobblestone driveway as she watched a mover toss her imported silk pillows onto the dirty concrete. "You stole our house," she sobbed, clutching her head in her hands. Aaron's hands shook violently as he stared at the massive mountain of his evicted belongings. His mind, entirely fractured by the relentless events of the past week, struggled to process the sheer velocity of his financial ruin. Ironclad Holdings. He muttered, his eyes darting frantically toward Jonathan. "Who the hell is Ironclad Holdings? I never signed anything with them. I will sue them. I will drag whatever predatory investment firm this is into federal court and expose them for illegal foreclosure practices. Give me the name of the managing director right now." Jonathan Vargas did not blink. He did not raise his voice. He simply reached into his tailored suit jacket and withdrew a single crisply folded sheet of heavy stock paper. He held it out, letting it flutter slightly in the morning breeze. "You do not need to file a lawsuit to find the managing director," Aaron Jonathan said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "You just need to read the Articles of Incorporation." Aaron snatched the paper, his manic eyes scanning the bold black text of the state registry document. He read the corporate address. He read the registered agent. And then his eyes locked onto the primary shareholder and sole managing member of Ironclad Holdings, LLC. His breath hitched sharply in his throat. All the remaining color completely drained from his face. The heavy legal paper slipped from his trembling fingers, drifting slowly onto the cobblestones. Megan looked up, her mascara-stained face contorted in pure confusion. "Aaron, who is it?" she pleaded, grabbing the fabric of his pant leg. "Who took the house?" Aaron could not even look at her. He stared blankly at the heavy oak doors of the mansion, his spirit entirely and permanently broken. "It is my father," he whispered, the absolute devastation hollowing out his voice. "He bought the debt. He owns the company that just threw us on the street." The sheer magnificent reality of their complete annihilation finally settled over the driveway. They had no corporate accounts, no luxury vehicles, no affluent country club friends, and now absolutely no roof over their heads. They were officially and entirely homeless, utterly defeated by the very man they had tried to casually discard and lock away. Jonathan Vargas offered absolutely zero sympathy. He walked down the final marble steps, stopping just a few feet away from Aaron's defeated, slumped figure. He reached deep into his trouser pocket and pulled out a cheap, tarnished, and slightly rusted brass key attached to a frayed piece of string. Jonathan tossed the key casually through the air. It hit the cobblestone driveway with a sharp, pathetic clatter, bouncing to a dead stop right against the toe of Aaron's scuffed shoe. "Wesley sends his absolute highest regards," Jonathan stated coldly, turning his back to walk back into the newly acquired mansion. "He wanted me to remind you that since you no longer have a primary residence, you are more than welcome to go live in that unpermitted, uninsulated wooden shed you built in his backyard." The sky over Atlanta had turned a bruised, heavy purple by the time the rusted hinge of my front gate whined open. I stood in the foyer watching the high-definition security monitor as Aaron dragged his feet up the long, winding driveway of my estate. He looked absolutely unrecognizable. The arrogant, tailored executive who had sat across from me at the steakhouse just weeks ago was completely gone. In his place was a broken, desperate man shivering in the humid evening air. He wore the same wrinkled button-down shirt he had been arrested in, stained with sweat and dirt from digging through the pile of his evicted belongings on the curb. His shoulders were slumped, his face unshaven, and his eyes carried the hollow, frantic panic of a cornered animal realizing there was no way out. He did not march up the front steps with his usual unwarranted authority. He practically crawled his scuffed shoes, dragging against the stone pavers. He reached the heavy oak door and raised a trembling fist, knocking with a pathetic, weak rhythm. I let him wait. I let the oppressive silence of the estate press down on him for 3 full minutes before I finally turned the brass deadbolt and pulled the door open. Aaron stood on my porch, shivering, tears already brimming in his bloodshot eyes. "Dad," he choked out, his voice cracking violently. "Please, I have nowhere else to go. The public defender they assigned me is completely useless. I am looking at 20 years in federal prison. I need money for a real lawyer. I am begging you, please help me." I did not step aside to let him in. I stood squarely in the threshold, looking down at the shivering, pathetic shell of the man I had raised. There was no rage left in my chest. The fiery anger that had fueled my financial counteroffensive had completely burned out, leaving behind nothing but an arctic, impenetrable expanse of ice. "You come to my home," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of a judge reading a death sentence. "You stand on the porch of the house you tried to steal using the voice of the son you murdered, and you have the sheer audacity to ask me for money." Aaron collapsed to his knees right there on the hard stone, burying his face in his dirty hands. "Dad, I am so sorry," he sobbed, his chest heaving with desperate, ugly gasps. "I lost everything. My house is gone. The company is gone. My friends will not even answer my texts. I have $20 in my pocket. I slept on a park bench last night because Megan took the last of the cash for a motel room and locked me out. I have been stripped of everything I ever cared about." I looked down at him, entirely unmoved by the theatrical display of his suffering. "You did not lose anything, Aaron. I corrected him coldly, stepping just an inch closer so he could feel the absolute chill of my presence. Losing implies an accident. It implies a tragic twist of fate. You methodically and deliberately threw your entire life into an incinerator. You forged my name on federal documents. You bled the company that put food on your table and paid for your college education. You looked me dead in the eye at a restaurant and told me my home was a burden, all while you were actively funneling a $300,000 commercial loan into your wife's shopping budget. You did not lose your life. You pawned it. Aaron grabbed the sharp crease of my tailored trousers, looking up with a face entirely slick with tears and snot. I was trying to build a legacy, he pleaded, completely oblivious to the absurdity of his own words. I wanted to be a titan like you. I wanted to show you I could take the company to the next level. I wanted you to be proud of me. You wanted the crown without carrying the weight of the sword, I replied, my voice slicing through his pathetic justifications like a razor blade. You wanted the corner office and the luxury cars, but you despised the dirt, the sweat, and the brutal hours required to actually earn them. You looked at my success and felt entitled to it simply because you shared my last name. You thought leadership was a credit card limit. You never understood that true power comes from integrity, and because you possess absolutely none, you are currently kneeling in the dirt where you belong. Aaron shook his head violently, desperate to find a scapegoat for his own monumental failures. It was Megan, he blurted out, his voice rising in a frantic, cowardly pitch. It was all her idea, Dad. I swear to you, she was the one who demanded the Buckhead mansion. She was the one who said we needed the country club memberships and the expensive cars to maintain our social image. She pushed me to take out those loans. She manipulated me into forging the power of attorney because she said you were hoarding the wealth and holding us back. She poisoned my mind against you. I looked at him, feeling a sudden intense wave of profound physical revulsion. Of all the pathetic, spineless maneuvers he had attempted, this was by far the most disgusting. You are a 35-year-old man, I stated, each word dripping with lethal contempt. You stood at an altar and chose to marry that woman. You chose to nod along when she insulted my grief. You chose to pick up a pen and forge my signature. Megan is a greedy, manipulative parasite, but she did not hold a gun to your head and force you to commit federal bank fraud. She simply held up a mirror to your own inherent weakness, and you gladly embraced the reflection. Blaming the woman you partnered with to destroy me does not make you a victim, Aaron. It just proves that you are a coward who cannot even own the consequences of his own malice. A real man stands tall when his empire falls. You are just crawling in the mud, pointing fingers at the person shivering next to you. Aaron opened his mouth to formulate another miserable excuse, but I raised a single rigid hand, silencing him instantly. There is no redemption here, I said, my voice devoid of any remaining emotion. I spent my entire life building a sanctuary for my family, and you tried to lock me in a shed. You are no longer my son. You are simply a federal defendant awaiting a prison sentence. Do not ever return to this property. If you step foot on this driveway again, the police will arrest you for trespassing before you even reach the porch. I stepped back into the grand foyer of the home I had built with the woman who would have been utterly ashamed of him. I grabbed the heavy brass handle of the solid oak door. Dad, please, Aaron screamed, scrambling forward on his hands and knees. You are all I have left. You are my father. I looked down at him one last time, my face an impenetrable mask of stone. I have no son, I said. I swung the heavy oak door forward. The massive wooden frame slammed shut with a deafening, thunderous boom that echoed through the empty estate, driving the brass deadbolt firmly into place and locking away my greatest failure forever. 6 months passed since the heavy oak door of my estate sealed my son's fate. The federal justice system moves with a slow, crushing inevitability when the evidence is bulletproof. Jonathan Vargas sat beside me in the polished gallery of the United States District Court as the judge handed down the sentences. Aaron and Megan stood before the bench in matching khaki jumpsuits, their arrogant country club facades completely erased by the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. They pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. The judge showed zero leniency, sentencing them both to 12 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. They did not look back at me as the marshals led them away in heavy iron chains. Their absence left a massive necessary void. The only piece of their shattered lives that I salvaged was the only piece that truly mattered. The family court judge granted me full, uncontested custody of my 8-year-old grandson, Dominic. Megan's parents, still reeling from their own devastating bankruptcy caused by their daughter's treachery, did not even attempt to fight me for him. They had retreated into humiliated obscurity. Dominic moved into the sprawling guest room of my estate the very next day. He was quiet at first, carrying the heavy trauma of his parents' spectacular collapse, but the resilient spirit of my father lived inside that boy. With my grandson safe under my roof, I turned my absolute focus toward purging the final remnants of Aaron's toxic incompetence from my commercial construction empire. I did not step back into the role of chief executive officer. I had spent 40 years grinding my joints into dust to build that company, and I had no intention of spending my final chapter sitting in a high-rise boardroom. Instead, I executed a massive strategic corporate restructuring. I fired the complacent accountant Thomas and replaced him with a strict, fiercely independent auditing firm to ensure total transparency. I legally transitioned the entire enterprise into an employee-owned cooperative. I sold my majority shares at a steeply discounted, highly favorable rate directly to the senior project managers, the master electricians, and the veteran foremen who had actually bled for the company over the last 2 decades. The men and women who poured the concrete and framed the steel were now the absolute masters of their own financial destinies. I effectively secured their families' futures while permanently ensuring that no entitled, inexperienced heir could ever again weaponize their hard labor for personal vanity. With the company legacy firmly protected, I established an ironclad financial fortress for Dominic. I sat down with Jonathan Vargas for 3 grueling days to draft a blind, irrevocable trust fund. This was not the kind of careless, open-ended slush fund that had completely ruined my son. The capital I secured from liquidating Aaron's fraudulent investments and selling the Buckhead mansion went directly into this heavily fortified account. But Dominic will not receive a single dime simply for breathing or turning 18. I structured the trust with ruthless character-building stipulations. To access any portion of the principal wealth, my grandson must first graduate from an accredited university or complete a certified journeyman trade program. He must maintain a clean legal record hold, a fully taxable job for 5 consecutive years, and demonstrate a profound understanding of financial literacy. If he wants to buy a house, the trust will match his down payment only after he saves the first half with his own 2 hands. I will not allow the poison of unearned privilege to infect my bloodline ever again. I am not going to leave behind a massive pile of easy cash to tempt another generation into lazy arrogance. I am leaving behind a rigid, uncompromising blueprint for manhood. If Dominic wants to wield the kind of power I built, he is going to have to sweat for it, bleed for it, and earn it exactly the way I did. I will give him the absolute best education, a safe home, and my unwavering guidance, but I will never again make the fatal mistake of funding a life that lacks a foundation of integrity. The dust has finally settled over my estate. It is a bright, unusually cool Tuesday morning in Atlanta. I am sitting in the deep, comfortable wicker chair on my wraparound front porch holding a steaming mug of strong black coffee. The air smells like fresh pine and blooming jasmine. The profound silence that used to feel like a heavy, isolating burden after Corinne passed away has transformed into a deep, vibrating peace. I look out across the manicured lawn and watch Dominic pulling a heavy green rubber hose across the grass. He is wearing a pair of miniature canvas work gloves, diligently watering the massive rose bushes that his grandmother planted 30 years ago. He is focused, careful, and remarkably strong for his age. Every time he finishes a section, he looks back over his shoulder to check if I am watching his face, breaking into a wide, gap-toothed smile when I give him a firm nod of approval. The generational trauma has been successfully amputated. The rotting branch of my family tree was cut away before it could infect the healthy roots. I take a slow, satisfying sip of my coffee, feeling the warm ceramic against my calloused palms. I know Corinne is looking down at us right now, watching her grandson thrive in the sanctuary she designed. She would be fiercely proud of the agonizing choices I had to make to protect our legacy. We are completely safe. The empire is secure. The thieves have been permanently locked away in federal cages, and the true heir to my history is finally learning how to build something real. This is my story. It is a brutal, necessary lesson about the absolute danger of mistaking an old father's quiet patience for weakness. Too many people in this world believe that age strips away a man's teeth. They think a quiet retirement makes you a soft, easily manipulated target. But a wolf resting in the shade is still a wolf, and true power does not diminish simply because it is no longer shouting. Never let greedy relatives, entitled children, or arrogant in-laws mistake your hard-earned generosity for an invitation to steal your dignity. You owe them absolutely nothing but the consequences of their own malicious actions. If you enjoyed hearing how I dismantled my son's fraudulent empire and took back control of my life, let me know which city or country you are listening from down in the comments section. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe respect is earned through hard work, not stolen through sheer entitlement. Thank you for your incredible support, and I will see you in the next story. Stay sharp and always protect what is yours. The most vital lesson I took from this entire ordeal is that unconditional love should never equal unconditional access to your life's work. As parents, we are naturally wired to provide, but we must never let that parental instinct blind us to the harsh reality of our children's actions. True love requires strict accountability. When you blindly finance a lifestyle they haven't earned, you aren't helping them build a future. You are actively funding their moral decay. You must protect your peace, your assets, and your dignity with the exact same ferocity you used to build them, even if the threat comes from your own flesh and blood. If this story resonated with you, please share this video with anyone who needs a firm reminder to stand their ground and protect their legacy against toxic family members.